Hey, warmer from the Elon! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Big XII Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we are going to be joined in a few minutes by Ryan McIntyre, who does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. We're going to be chatting up with him about what we've all seen here in the first week plus of the college basketball season. Additionally, we're going to be chatting with him about just these high totals that we have been seeing, the way that we have been seeing a lot of blowouts recently. We also have to get his thoughts because he does the Ryan and Rush show when it comes to West Virginia athletics, what we've seen out of that team, what we've seen out of the Big 12, and we'll take a look at a few games for Wednesday. So we got a little bit of everything going on there. In the final segment, gonna get you guys picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Wednesday as we hit some bank shots. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one or two ways to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, we are powered by Better. That is BETR. When you go to better.app, you'll want to type in that promo code of VSIMPOD, VSIMPOD, because with Better, they are making it easier than ever before to be able to get into the game. And when you type in VSIMPOD over at BETR.app, you're able to get into the game with $10 free. And how about if we get into the game by taking a look at everything that we saw out there on the court in college basketball on Tuesday, try to find some trends and try to get to know these teams a little bit better.
Games from yesterday is Greg buzzing about. Here is the rowdy recap.
It took overtime for Michigan to be able to get the job done. Man, if you had the under on the closing number of 168.5 for Wake Forest versus Michigan, you just missed that under. 85-84 though. Michigan, they do find a way to persevere and get the job done. Looked like Michigan was going to ride and hide with this game. Up 47-34 at the half, but Wake Forest comes storming back. Wake Forest still rough with their three-point shooting, or else they would have won this game. They went 10 of 34 from three-point range, but you had a really nice performance from Juke Harris, who was able to spy that Wake Forest team with 19 points. And for Michigan, the way that they won this game was on the glass because they themselves were brutal from three, 4 of 25 from distance. This was technically a neutral court game over at Little Caesars Arena, and boy, did it show. But for Michigan, Roddy Gale off the bench was able to supply the team with 13 points. And today, Mara, who never really found it over at UCLA, 18 points, 13 rebounds. A lot of people thought that Yaxel Lendeborg was going to be the main guy, but Mara, he was the guy that came through and he saves the bacon of the Michigan Wolverines. This might end up being the biggest road win of the season. Duke versus Army. I mean, a salute to veterans out there. It is Veterans Day as I record this, so hopefully you all had a wonderful day. We appreciate your service, and I appreciate all the people that keep us safe here in this fine country, man. Duke was not keeping Army safe from a blowout loss. 114-59 the final. Good gesture of them to go to Army, but this is a new-look Army team. Jackson Furman off the bench had 20 points for Army. Rest of the team had 39, so that was not great as Army loses a rebound battle 48-27. They lose a turnover battle 17-10, and for Duke, they went 16 out of 37 from three-point range off the bench. Darren Harris, he went 5 of 7 from three-point range. Cameron Boozer, 15 points, 9 rebounds, 2 steals. The other Bruiser and Caden Boozer, he had 10 points off the bench. Just a completed utter blowout. Dame Sarr had some nice highlight moments here. Yeah, this was just very much a blowout. And then for North Carolina, a little bit more of a test from Radford. Unable to cover, but they do get an 89-74 win for North Carolina. Luke Bragovich, he comes in, he's able to supply the team with 19 points for North Carolina. Just 9 of 31 from three-point range, but Radford was not any better. 7-30 from three-point range, and for North Carolina, they control the boards 55-43. They win the rebound battle with Caleb Wilson coming in. He was able to supply the team with 14 rebounds, but very clear that Radford was looking to be a pretty competitive team this season. Florida, the defending champions, got all that they wanted from Florida State. Florida State had been playing some harebrained games. This one was a little bit more calmed down, but Florida, they find a way to just barely persevere in this game. This by a kind of 78-76, as for Florida State, they go in this game just 9 of 34 from three-point range, or else they would have had a good shot of being able to pull off the upset. Thomas Howe, he was able to really come through for Florida, 20 points, 13 rebounds, and he went 2 of 6 from 3. Meanwhile, Ruben Chinyelu, down low, pair of blocks, 16 rebounds, 10 points for Florida. Very clear that the backcourt is in a little bit of transition. 18 turnovers out of them, though 6 of them were off of Alex Condon. And for Florida State, the way that they will remain lively, Robert McCray, who comes in from Jacksonville, he had himself a very nice game. He was able to slide that team with 29 points. No such issues for Wisconsin, though, as this ranked team was able to cover a large number, 86 of 55. They take down Ball State. Nolan Winter, well, it is starting to be winter, and he's making it cold for other teams. 19 points, 10 rebounds for the Badgers, as for Wisconsin, 14 of 38 from three-point. Ball State goes 7 of 23 from the outside. Wisconsin, 15 turnovers. That's a little bit unlike them, but for Wisconsin, this is very much like them. Shot 100% at the free throw line, 8 of 8 at the charity stripe, and for Ball State, Devin Barnes was able to chip in there 12 points and just really didn't have too much from anyone else. So that was a not so great effort from them. Kansas looking very strong on defense, so they're able to lay it on Texas A&M Corpus Christi. This by kind of 77 to 46, covered pretty much any number that you got. Flory Badunga, he is back from season ago, and he's back to being able to spot shots down low. 4 blocks, 8 rebounds, 12 points out of him. You had the star freshman in this game, Mr. Peterson, be out of the fold for Kansas, so that's something that you do want to note, but they didn't need him because you had Cole Rosario be able to slide the team with 16 points, and Texas A&M Corpus Christi, 1 of 14 from 3-point range. That is just not going to cut it in this day and age, and this is certainly going to be able to cut it if you're a ranked team, being able to have this big of a blowout. Arkansas all over Central Arkansas, 93 to 56. I know that this was a number that was getting very lofty towards tip-off, but for Arkansas, they were able to cover at the very least the opening numbers in this one, and for Arkansas, they did a rock-solid job from 3-point range, 13 of 34 from the outside with Carter Knox. He took Central Arkansas to the School of Hard Knocks, 4 of 6 from the outside, 19 points, 10 rebounds, and for Central Arkansas, they lose that rebound battle by a count of 49 to 35. For Central Arkansas, they only turned the ball over 10 times, so yay, barely there. And Cameron Hunter, who was their top scorer a few years ago, he's back. He was able to give that team 16 points, but very much a blowout loss there. And then we did see the line in Louisville versus Kentucky get quite a bit steamed. For Kentucky, they opened up at more around about 3.5-point underdogs. They closed more around 6.5, and Louisville, despite the fact that they missed, I think it was 6 or 7 free throws in the final minute, they still find a way to be able to persevere and cover that number. 96 to 88 the final is for Louisville. They were 21 of 31 at the charity stripe, and when it comes to Louisville, they had Mikael Brown really be able to step up. 21 points, 5 assists. Ryan Conwell was able to supply 24 points, and for Kentucky, they remain lively with the fact that they went 12 of 34 from 3-point range. Denzel Aberdeen, he was able to supply the team with 26 points, but not a lot outside of that, as for Kentucky, it was a not-so-great night for them in terms of their forward scoring. They actually won the rebound battle 42 to 40, but the big men like Mohamedou Diabate and Brandon Garrison, those two guys, they combined for 10 points. So they needed a little bit more of something there, and Delaware, they got a much more of something than they did a few nights ago. Delaware was coming off of a non-Division I loss to Delaware Wilmington. They actually led at the half against BYU. They don't get the job done, but they get an easy cover, 85 to 68 the final, and BYU actually down 3-0 to the under thus far this season, as AJ Devanza, he was rock solid, 18 points, 7 rebounds, and Richie Saunders, he did his part. He and Robert Wright both had 26 points apiece, so it was very much a three-man effort here from BYU as they won 12 of 32 from 3-point range, and for BYU, they only forced 5 turnovers on Delaware. Now, Delaware got bludgeoned on the glass. They lose that battle 46 to 25, but Delaware was able to remain lively, going 11 of 24 from 3-point range, as he had 18 points apiece from Mikan Emery along with Christian Bliss. So a little bit of Bliss if you took the points there with Delaware, or for you like me, took the under, a little bit of Bliss as well. And then Illinois without Tomislav Avicic. They just barely find a way to get the job done. Texas Tech was down 13 points at the half. Texas Tech makes a nice surge in the second half. Not quite enough to be able to cover the closing number of 3.5. There were some places that if you dove in very, very early, you were able to get a 5.5, but 81 to 77. Illinois finds a way to persevere. Illinois 7 to 22 from 3-point range, but Kylan Boswell is looking to have a big season, 22 points out of him. And Andrei Stojakovic off the bench, he was their top scorer. He supplied the team with 23 points. For Texas Tech, you had Mr. JT Toppin supply 35 points, 11 rebounds. He did his part, but the rest of the team was not able to come up big for them, other than Lawan Watts. Lawan Watts, 21 points, but Christian Anderson, who's been taking a little bit of stride forward with his offense, just 8 points in this one. Tyree Bryant, Donovan Atwell, 3 points apiece. Just not going to cut it for Texas Tech, so they are unable to cover cover that closing number of more around 3.5. Arizona, really good defensive effort against Northern Arizona, and you did finally see some unders come through in college basketball on Tuesday. 84-49 Arizona. They just absolutely lambasted Northern Arizona's the Lumberjacks. Well, they got jacked up from being able to make any shots. 20 of 62 from the floor, and for Arizona, Jaden Bradley chipped in there 13 points. Cole Pete, not necessarily the biggest effort, 10 points, 7 rebounds, but he did his part against Florida a little bit earlier, and Toby walk off the bench, 10 points, 9 rebounds. So Arizona, they do find a way to be able to persevere, get the job done. That was a very hefty number that they were laying, though, by the way, for Arizona. They were laying in that neighborhood about 34.5 points in some spots. It opened up at a 34.5. Some places close as high as at 36. So it was very dependent upon your number as to whether or not you were able to get a cover on that one. And for Gonzaga, they got a little bit of tests in the first half from Creighton. The second half, it was just a runaway. 90-63 the final is. There was a point where Gonzaga was outscoring Creighton in the second half, 32-7. That was a less than savory effort, to say the least, out of Creighton, as they gave you a nice first half, but then they faded away. As for Creighton, 7-25 from three-point range, and they had 18 turnovers and 18 made field goals. And the Gonzaga defense looking pretty solid. All three of their games have one under. And for Gonzaga, how about Graham Ike going 4 of 4 from 3, 8 of 10 from the floor, 20 points, 10 rebounds. He was able to stuff the statue in so many different ways in this one, and then you were able to get 13 points off the bench from Mario St. Cypri. He looks like he's going to be a rock-solid player this season for Gonzaga. So most of the ranked teams, they were able to take care of business and get the job done. And then if you're looking at other games, just absolutely embarrassing what we saw out of Boston College. They, in some places, opened up as high as a 20-point favorite. I think that this came back on the side of Central Connecticut as they closed more around about a 17.5 to an 18-point dog. But man, still, 60-59, Central Connecticut, kudos to them. I know that they had a few nice upsets last season. It looks like they're back in full force as Boston College, 7-34 from 3. Donald Mann, well, the hand slapped him in the face because his hand went 1 of 12 from 3-point range. That's not quite going to be able to cut it. For Central Connecticut, they actually win the rebound battle 41-40. That's not great if you're Boston College. And for Central Connecticut, off the bench, Melo Sanchez was able to supply 17 points. So Central Connecticut, they do a great job in terms of being able to get the job done. After a little bit of a wobbly night number 1, Auburn ends their scoring order, win and cover over Wofford, 93-62, and it looks like Keshawn Hall is going to be in for a very, very big season here for Auburn. As for our good friend in Mr. Keshawn Hall, 20 points, 11 rebounds, 6 assists, so nice clean double-double there. And they did have Kevin Overton coming off the bench. He was able to supply the team with 13 points. In terms of late night action, St. Mary's was able to put up a pretty nice number on Ohio, 90-60. Ohio gets bludgeoned by St. Mary's. As for Ohio, they go just 37.5% from the floor, and shock, surprise, St. Mary's won the battle on the glass, 40-29, as Andrew McKeever, 7-footer, he was able to supply the team with 10 boards in this one. Mikey Lewis, a little bit of a silent night with 14 points, but Liam Campbell, he comes in off the bench. He was able to do a very rock-solid job. He supplied the team with 20 points, so there was a very nice quality win out there for St. Mary's. And then you did see Appalachian State be able to give Ohio State a little bit of a test. They do fade away in the second half, but they're able to cover a rather lofty number that a lot of places was 25 plus, 75-53 in the final, as Brandon Noel was able to power Ohio State to victory in this one, 17 points, 11 boards. You had John Mobley Jr. to supply 16, but Appalachian State, always a relatively rock-solid defense. They were able to hold in there. Alcorn State covered against Maryland, as Big Ten teams really did not have the best go of it in terms of covering the spread. Maryland, 84-64, a win, but no cover against Alcorn State. Penn State was very much pushed by Navy. Navy was able to hold in there to the tune of single digits, 80-71 final in this one. Navy returns 90% of their minutes from a season ago, so they did a nice quality job there. And Maryland Eastern Shore found a way to be able to cover a large number against Nebraska, 69-50 the final. Maryland Eastern Shore right now getting no offense generated whatsoever, but the defense was not too bad. Nebraska just 6 of 32 from 3-point range. The way that they powered themselves to victory was Price Samford being able to supply 19 points, but hey, Maryland Eastern Shore did force overtime against Georgia Tech as well. So in an day and age where we're seeing 100 billion points being scored, they've been doing a nice job in terms of holding it down, playing a little bit more low and slow. For the Big 12 teams, you did have Central Florida be able to take down Florida A&M 97-60, just a complete bludgeoning out there. And then Cincinnati, they do get a quality cover against Dayton. This by kind of 74-62. Looks like Cincinnati's going to be a little bit more defense oriented this year after they held Dayton, going 2 of 26 from 3-point. Javon Bennett, 1 of 10 from distance. Emil Letang, he goes 1 of 6 from 3-point range. That's just simply not going to cut it. And Cincinnati, they were on to going 9 of 19 from 3-point range, so a very solid effort out there. And I talked about the fact that, Boston College be unable to cover. The rest of the ACC had a little bit of a better night. I know that doesn't sound like much, but SMU, they take down Murray State 102-91. I believe that Murray State is going to be very, very good this season. And for this SMU offense, they look very rock solid with every one of their starters being able to score at least 11 points in this one, headlined by Kevin Miller. I refuse to call him Boopy, going 28 points. And he was able to go 3 of 5 from 3. Team in general, 7 of 16 from 3-point range. So nice quality win there. As Murray State, they themselves went 9 of 26 from the outside. You had Virginia get a very, very big time win, 91-53 all over Hampton. And then Notre Dame over Eastern Illinois, 78-58. Play on this one. I actually think Eastern Illinois is going to be halfway decent this season. Carson Tout finally giving Notre Dame some rebounding. He was able to spy the team with 11 rebounds in that one as well. So that was a very rock solid win for them. And then you did see out there in the Big East, Butler all over Chicago State, 98-66. Final on that one, that was a spread that got very, very lofty. So depended upon your number out there. And then also in the ACC, it was a win but no cover for Clemson, 83-56. They were able to get the job done against Morehead State. And Yale, one of the standout performances of the night for me. I recognize that Quinnipiac may not be like some top 25 team, but 97-60. Yale wins by 37 points on the road. They go 10 of 18 from 3-point range. Riley Fox was foxy off the bench. He had 13 points in 19 minutes. And for Quinnipiac, they go 5 of 24 from 3-point range. They lose the rebound battle 34-26. And Yale, they completely just blasted Navy on their home floor as well. They're looking like one of the best mid-major teams in all of college basketball right now. Boise State, after they took that initial opening night loss to our good friends Hawaii Pacific, they blow out Utah Valley. And then against UT Rio Grande Valley, they're able to cover a large number, 85-65. They get the W out there. And then for Mike Bibby over there at Sacramento State, a spirited effort. They don't get the win against UC Santa Barbara, but they do get the cover, 92-87. Looks like his team is going to be playing up tempo. And UNLV, another rough home loss. They lose to Montana 102-93, as it appears as though UNLV is going to be playing the Olay style of defense this year. They're missing a true 7-footer that was supposed to be coming into the program, as Trey Gibbs-Lawhorn had 26 points. But how about Money? Money Williams was able to spy 30 points and 8 assists. And if you're taking a look at what we're all getting trend-wise in college basketball right now, it has been an overwhelming season. But as I was alluding to, we did see the under come through on Tuesday. On Tuesday, you had 23 overs of 40 unders, so 63.5% of games went under the total, and the underdogs finally had themselves a day on Tuesday. 35-27-1 against the spread for underdogs on Tuesday. And looking overall this season, it's still been a rough year for underdogs. Favorites hitting at 53.7% on the spread, 211, 182, and 5 against the spread. And the overs, they're down to just 50.5%, 199 overs, 196 unders, and a few pushes. Don't tell that to UMKC, who gave up 100 points to Iona, and I stupidly thought that game was going to be going under, but you know what? The unders, they're starting to come through. So that's what we all saw in college basketball on Tuesday, and that's where we're all getting trend-wise. Coming next, how about if we do chat with one of our good friends, Ryan McIntyre. He does such an amazing job over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. We're going to talk some Big 12, Wednesday's games, the high-scoring games that we're seeing to start the season, and so much more right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Are you looking to get an inside edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word, .com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peters, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It's always great to be joined by this band as we've got Ryan McIntyre aboard. He does a tremendous job over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. He and our good friend Kobe Dan do an amazing job with the college experience. You're able to catch that every night as they, much like myself, are doing a great job breaking down all the games, not just power conference games or anything like that. They're diving into the nooks and crannies of college basketball. Those are two guys that absolutely love this sport. And with Ryan, he also does a great job on the West Virginia front as well with the Ryan and Rush Show that's dedicated all to Mountaineer athletics. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at Moneyline_Mac, spelled MAC on Mac. And Ryan, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Greg, always appreciated. We're finally got these games rocking and rolling.
Yes, we certainly do. And what has been rocking and rolling this far this season has been the scoring. And I want to start there with you. Just how have you had to take a look at totals this far this season? Because, I mean, typically when it comes to these non-conference games, you're going to see a little bit less defense than what you're going to be fighting in conference play. There are guys trying to find their footing, and there's going to be different rotations. But, I mean, it is wild night in and night out to see, like, the average total be above 155. And I just have never seen the, for lack of a better term, lack of defense that we've seen here in the first few nights of the season.
I think it's kind of interesting, Greg. Maybe it has to deal with the portal to a certain degree, a team trying to really find their footing. But, I mean, you got teams scoring in the hundreds consistently. Look at a team like Kent State that traditionally is a defensive-oriented program. Their games were in the hundreds the first couple games. And then with Iowa State and Mississippi State, I mean, I went into that game, I'm like, oh, Chris Jans, TJ Otzelberger, we're going to get a wrestling match here. This is going to be ultra physical. 96-80. It's kind of wild, to your point.
Yeah, and how have you had to adjust to it? Because I'm having to put my totals up so much higher than I have in the past. Now, I do think that there's going to be a point where it just goes a little bit too far, and that's going to be giving us a lot of value with regards to those unders. But still, as of right now, it's just really dicey to be able to take a shot at any sort of under whatsoever because these games have been harebrained, wild, and crazy.
Yeah, I think we'll get a nice discount when we get to these neutral site foreign tournaments here coming up here in 2 weeks. Just with the shooting traditionally is not very good. The games are played earlier. So I'm going to look to back the unders during feast week, just not used to playing in those gyms rather than playing in your home courts.
Yep, especially with the back-to-back spots as well. And that's something that I think is so big with regards to non-conference play as well, because this is something that I picked up upon a few nights ago. Chattanooga had to play a back-to-back. They played at St. Mary's, and then they played at UNLV. They did not cover any of those games. And how much do you want to be taking a look at those sorts of spots as well? Because we've got some teams just playing very oddball sort of situations. And then you've got other teams like Middle Tennessee is going to be playing their first game against a Division I team here on Wednesday against Evansville.
I look at it tremendously this time of year. Teams that are playing the third, fourth leg of a road trip, that's not what you expect in college basketball. That's like an NBA thing. And then we see NBA teams struggle to cover those games towards the end of those road trips. If NBA guys that are true professionals are struggling to do so, then you know the college kids are going to as well. So yeah, I definitely always look at the scheduling spots. And I do like taking teams that are able to kind of stay out in the second leg of a road trip, or especially when they're going to elevations with the Colorados and Utahs of the world, those states. So those are some of the spots I'm looking at. But yeah, I mean, you really got to dive into how many games they've played in the week. If you see a team playing their fourth game in like 8 days, that might be a fade that night.
Yep, exactly. And I do think that that's very important to be taking a look at this time of year. And teams do play a little bit of a funky schedule typically before the multi-team event, which is the Feast Week tournaments that you're talking about, as well as Ryan McIntyre, who does such a great job over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. He's joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And we have been noticing a lot of overs thus far, but we have seen a few teams stay tried and true to their system, and you cover one of them over there at West Virginia. As we know, with Coach Hodge, when he was over at North Texas, his teams were some of the slowest in all of college basketball, very much built around defense. We have seen that in the first few games of the season for West Virginia, one of the few teams that have yet to play an over thus far this season. And just what have you seen on this Mountaineers team? Because it feels like as so many of these teams are playing up tempo, as so many of these teams have a lot of change, you've got Mr. Hodge staying very tried and true to his style.
That's what they do. They're going to defend. They're going to play very deliberate on the defensive side of the ball. You kind of just look over at KenPom. I mean, they're ranked 363 out of 365 in adjusted tempo. So it's going to be interesting when we get to conference play. I usually like to favor the teams that play extremely slow and are extremely deliberate. I see Iowa as well as right there as being extremely slow with McCollum, just like he was at Drake. St. Mary's is always very slow under Randy Bennett. It's going to be interesting.
Yes, it is going to be, and that's going to be a lot of fun to say the least. With West Virginia, you've got a lot of good games coming up for them, and just how do you take a look at them in the hierarchy of the Big 12? Because it feels like the Big 12 thus far has been a big divide between have and have-nots in terms of the way that they have performed this far, because the loss that TCU took to New Orleans to begin the season, that was not great to say the least. Looks like Central Florida might be in for a little bit of a strange year, and Cincinnati got pushed by Georgia State. Meanwhile, Kansas, I know that they took that loss to North Carolina, but I think that there's some upside there. Obviously, we're awaiting what happens in Texas Tech versus Illinois. We're recording this before that goes down, but we mentioned Iowa State, how good they looked, and it feels like in the Big 12, it might be a little bit more tiered than it has been in past seasons.
It really is. I think you kind of look at that bottom tier being the Colorados, the Utahs, the UCFs, and TCU. You may be able to even throw Arizona State in there. You look at the top. The top is as strong as ever. What do they got? 6 teams in the top 20, and realistically probably have like 3 or 4 Final Four contenders. So the top is loaded once again, the Big 12, but the basement definitely is as low as it's been. I look at West Virginia being in kind of the middle of the pack in the Big 12.
Yeah, but I think that that's going to be a interesting place to be because I don't know how many teams we're going to have in the middle of the pack this year. I think that Oklahoma State is actually very much improved. I was impressed by their win against Texas A&M, so there's a little bit of upside on that front, but I don't feel like there's going to be too much of a middle, and that could actually bode very well for a West Virginia team that I think we both agree. They're not on par with likes maybe like an Arizona or an Iowa State, but they certainly have looked better than your likes of TCU, Colorado, you mentioned. Utah got pushed to overtime by Weber State as well, and I think that they find themselves in the middle with maybe like Baylor and Oklahoma State, I think it's fair to say, maybe in that tier.
The middle of the pack in the Big 12 is exactly what you talked about. West Virginia, probably Cincinnati, Oklahoma State seems improved. K-State, they're so up and down. We'd probably throw Baylor into that tier. But then that top tier with Houston, Iowa State, Texas Tech, Arizona, BYU, and Kansas. I know Kansas has a loss, but I still put them in that category.
Yep, I think that Kansas is going to be there when it's all said and done as well. And we do have a few Big 12 games that are going to be going down on Wednesday, not necessarily the most marquee of them, as Oklahoma State is going to be taking on Prairie View. And Houston is a north of 28-point favorite against Oakland. But that said, this is an Oakland team that actually pushed Purdue very, very heavily a few nights ago, based around a lot of junior college guys. And, well, in their other game against Michigan, they did not push Michigan as they gave up 121 points in that one. How do you take a look at this game for Houston? Because in their first 2 games, they did not cover against Towson, which I attribute that more to Towson being really good than anything else, but was a little bit lackluster against Lehigh night number 1. That was maybe a little bit concerning.
I don't want to say they've gone through the motions, but they definitely have not had the same sense of urgency that they've had in the bye games in the past. So maybe it's a result of them getting to the national championship last year and just, I don't know, knowing that they're going to be there in the end. But also, they do have a lot of new pieces with some of the freshmen that they brought in.
Yep, they certainly do. And Fleming's in that backcourt is, I think, going to be really good for them. And it's going to be interesting to take a look at what we're going to be able to get out of them moving forward. As Ryan McIntyre, he does such a great job over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network with the show, The College Experience. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And Houston, just one of 2 ranked teams that are going to be in action on Wednesday, as Tennessee is, I'm not even kidding you, a 40-point favorite against North Florida. And I actually think that that's a great talking point because we're also seeing this as well. We have seen these favorites just be able to clean house. How much do you think we might be getting to a little bit of a point of no return? Because I like this Tennessee team. I like the fact that they brought in Jacoby Gillespie and Nate Ament. I think is going to be rock solid. I just can't lay 40 points here in this game between Tennessee and North Florida, though.
That definitely does seem like an inflated line, but to your point, like these favorites have cleaned it up here. And I just think that sometimes the physicality versus an inferior team when you're on the 3rd and 4th leg of a road trip. So I'll probably end up laying it, but this isn't one I'm running to bet right away.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And just how have you been able to take a look at these underdogs this far this season? Because quite a few of them have had a little bit of a rough go of it. Is there any sort of characteristics that you want to take a look at for the underdogs that you do want to backslash fade? Because it's been a very dangerous game this year if you've been taking the points.
It has. I like taking underdogs that kind of got embarrassed the previous game, and they're an experienced group because I know that they're going to bounce back. They've been through the wars together. A team like Navy was a team I was looking to back. Coming off the Yale beatdown, I kind of wanted to hop back in on them against Penn State to right the ship a little bit. So we'll see how that goes. Those are kind of the teams that I like to monitor.
Yep, I think that that's really well said by you, being able to take a look at experience. And guys have actually played with one another, like a team that I was able back on Tuesday. We'll see how it goes. Creating the fact that they brought in multiple guys from Iowa, that was something that was speaking to me a little bit as well. So I think that those are very good looks as well. And I do think that we've got ourselves some interesting looks as well, because you covered this man last season when he was over at West Virginia. You got DeVries squared over at Indiana, looked very good over the weekend against Marquette. Now they play UW Milwaukee as a 22.5 to a 23.5 point favorite. How do you look at a spot like this? Because you know Mr. DeVries better than most people, and with this UW Milwaukee squad, I think they might actually be catching them at the right time, because I'm not sure if you ever take a look at this angle, but after you have a big giant triumph like Indiana did, going to Chicago, absolutely lambasting Marquette, sometimes you get a little bit of a letdown in that next game when you take a step down in competition. I think that that could be very good for a Milwaukee team that they've got quite a few guys who have been in the system for a few years.
We love playing the letdown angles. I know these kids are getting paid, but like we forget that they're still 18 to 22-year-old and they're human. So yeah, I will be on the points with Milwaukee, with Indiana coming off that big win. I know that they looked super impressive, but they shot lights out too. So I anticipate a little bit of a shooting regression game.
Yep, I do as well. This has been an Indiana team that has looked very good with their offense last year. As you remember over at West Virginia, granted, this was with Tucker DeVries out of the fold. West Virginia, much more of a defensive team rather than an offensive team last year. So I'm turning over a bit of a new leaf there. And then I think that this is one of the more intriguing games of the night as well. Minnesota and Missouri over the last few years have had quite a few rivalries. And for Missouri, they're about a 6.5 point favorite with a total of 156.5. And with the way that I've had to adjust totals, I look at this 156.5 with Missouri, and that actually feels really low to me, and this is going to be one of those games where I do take a shot on the over.
Interested to see how this plays out, because Minnesota, Nico Medved, year number one. Can they find their footing here? Tough draw, Missouri there on the road. I think I'm probably going to lay with Missouri just because of the continuity and just Dennis Gates heading into year number 4 versus Nico Medved, their first true road game. So yeah, I'll be on Missouri laying the points here.
Yep, I wouldn't want to go past like a 6.5 to a 7, but I'm right there with you on that Missouri home court as well. I think that that's such a big factor as well. And then with this Wednesday card, as I always like to say, there's not a ton of sizzle, but there's a ton of steak. The only two ranked teams are Houston and Tennessee, but you've got a lot of really good matchups, like a intercity rivalry between Tulsa and Oral Roberts, I think is going to be relatively fun. You've got a lot of California schools that are going to be going at it as well. Anything else on the board that's really popping out to you?
Oregon State and North Texas was an interesting game last year. North Texas was able to win a tight road game. You get North Texas coming off that crazy buzzer beater. Now they got to head all the way out to Corvallis in a revenge game. I like the Beavs. I think Wayne Tinkle's group, it is a new group, but I like them to bounce back here and get some revenge on North Texas and Mean Green against Danielle Robinson in year number 1.
Hey, I am right there with you. Heading to Corvallis because I actually, before I headed out to lovely Las Vegas, my job previously was actually for the official flagship station of the Oregon Ducks, so I know all about those Pac-12 teams. Heading to Corvallis is not easy, to say the least. That's a lot of travel for a team that is out there in the great state of Texas, so I'm right there with you. And with Oregon State, I do think that they find a way to get the job done. I wouldn't want to lay much more than 2.5, but I'm going to be right there with you on that one. And Ryan, I know you're doing an incredible job taking a look at this great sport of college basketball night in and night out. You and Kobe are just amazing over at the College Experience, so let the good people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Absolutely. I always appreciate it, Greg. Yeah, go check us out at the College Experience every single night. College football, college basketball, and much more. And Twitter, I'm at Moneyline_Mac. I always appreciate it, Greg.
Always great to be able to get Ryan aboard every single time he joins me. He lends such great insights and did so once again today. So big thanks to Ryan for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, it is that John Podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Wednesday as we have some bank shots. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peters, and now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by Ryan McIntyre. He does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. Every single time he joins me, he lends such great insights, and he did so once again today. So a big thanks to Ryan for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Wednesday as we hit some bank shots.
Most financial establishments close at a certain time, but not here. It is time for a side and total on every game on today's betting board bank shots.
Do you note that as per usual, any changes that are made to these plays will be listed up on my Twitter/X feed at @GUnit_81, and we're going to be going in Las Vegas rotation order. This is where we go with the games in the bigger conferences first, and then the smaller conference games are going to be at the bottom. This is going to involve the MEAC, the SWAC, the America East, the Atlantic Sun, the Big South, the Patriot League, the NEC. I think I've gotten them all, the Southland if I didn't say the Southland, so that'll keep things all nice, neat, clean, and easy. But if we do get things started with 681, 682 on the betting board, it is Fort Wayne, and they hit the road. They're facing off against Western Michigan. Western Michigan opened up as a pick-up to a 1-point favorite. They are now between a 1.5 to a 2.5-point dog. Total on this game, it is 159.5. I wholeheartedly agree with this line move, by the way. I did set Fort Wayne as a 5.5-point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to take a shot here. Fort Wayne just always does a good job in terms of winning the turnover battle, as last year they were a top 20 team in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis on offense, 35th in terms of turnovers generated on defense, and they go up against a Western Michigan team that was in the bottom 5 in all of college basketball last year in terms of their three-point shooting percentage. They were 242nd in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and for Western Michigan, they should have a little bit of an edge down low, as Western Michigan last year, a top 100 team in terms of percentage of their missed shots, that resulted in an offensive rebound, and they do return one or two of those guys from down low from a season ago, Max Burton being one of the main of them, but they lose that entire backcourt from a season ago, but they really didn't add three-point shooting to be able to elevate from a season ago. Like, you bring in Jaden Brewer, and Brewer was a nice scorer over at Florida National. He was able to give that team about 14 points per contest, but he's a career 22% three-point shooter and a career 64% free throw shooter, so that's not really going to be able to elevate you with that regard. You're bringing a guy like a Trey Lewis, who's a 6'6", a little bit of a gadget guy, actually began his career over at Fort Wayne, where last year gave the team 8 points, shot 38% from 3, but on very low volume, and you don't have as much size as a season ago. To Klon Peterson, great name. He's a guy that they're going to be looking to after he was at the non-D1 ranks last season. And for Fort Wayne, they do have to overturn a lot of that backcourt from a season ago. But I like the fact that they brought in Mikhail Stevenson, a nice double-figure scorer over at Grambling last year that was part of a more slow and controlled style. You've got DeAndre 30,000 Craig, who he was a part of an up-tempo style over at Denver. Nice double-figure scorer. Okay, not amazing three-point shooter, but having Corey Hednott back from a season ago, he's their main holdover, was a little bit more of a sixth man with 9 points on 39% three-point shooting, generated a little bit over a steal per contest. That does a nice job of being able to just get things going in the right direction with regards to this backcourt. And additionally, for Fort Wayne, they're probably going to have a little bit of a tough time on the glass once again, but I do think that Ibrahim Akaba, who comes on over from the non-D1 ranks at 6'9", he'll be able to give them a little bit of rebounding. Seems like he's not going to be as versatile of a big man, but it's someone that's able to hit the glass. And then you got Maximus Nelson back from a season ago as well. So with Fort Wayne, I did set them as a 5.5-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay that number, and did set my total at 157.5. Western Michigan, a more mid-tempo team. Fort Wayne's looking to crank up the tempo, but new look backcourt for Fort Wayne, and a Western Michigan team that doesn't knock down threes like the under and Fort Wayne. 683, 684 on the card. Sena's on the road against St. Bonaventure. The Bonnies are a 7.5 to an 8.5-point favorite. 140.5 to 141.5 is the total. Set my total at 142.5, so I'm going to be in on the over. For St. Bonaventure, they're always a very slow and controlled team under Dr. Schmidt, as last year they were once again well outside the top 275 in terms of total possessions per game, but there's reason to believe that this is going to be a rock-solid offense with bringing in Daryl Simmons. He was a nice double-figure scorer in the Big South last season over at Gardner-Webb, career about 38% three-point shooter, and he's going to be able to play well off of Deshaunte Bone, who's just getting back off of injury. First 2 games of the season hasn't necessarily seen a ton of minutes. They're looking to be able to build him up, but then you bring in Frank Mitchell, who I still remember over at Canisius 2 seasons ago, was averaging a double-double with 12 points, 11.5 rebounds per game. This guy has a lot of ability, so I really do love what he's able to bring to the table. And for St. Bonaventure, seems like they might be going a little bit deeper into their bench. The one knock that I always have on Dr. Schmidt is that he never really wants to go into his bench at all, so that's a little bit of an issue for this team. You don't have a ton of depth with the St. Bonaventure team, and it looks like it's going to be that way once again this year, which that's not bad at the beginning part of the season. When it comes to the middle part and the back half of the season, that's where it really takes hold. And for Siena, the Jerry McNamara era has been quite solid, and they did a nice job of bringing back so many of those rock-solid pieces from a season ago. A guy in Justice Schultz, who last year was giving you 15 points, over 4.5 assists per contest. You've got Brandon Coyle back, who's been at 6'7", a career about 37% three-point shooter. Last year supplied the team with 13 points, 4 boards per contest. They don't have as much shot blocking from a season ago with the likes of Miles Wilmoth and company out of the fold, but they did a good job of bringing in a big man in Riley Mulvey, who I think think is going to be able to give you a bit of something down low. Began his career over at Iowa, couldn't really get out there on the floor, but provides 7-foot size. I think that he's an upside guy. And then Gavin Doty, I think is going to be a nice little bit of a gadget guy. Last year, 11.5 points as a part-time starter, 6 boards. He shot it from 3, only at about a 28.5% clip, but I think that Sena is a little bit better in the backcourt this year than they have been in past years, but I do think that the St. Bonaventure style is really going to be taking it out of them. And for the Sena team, they did give up quite a few open looks from 3-point range a season ago. Thus far, they've been pretty rock solid with their 3-point shooting defense, and with their 3-point shooting offense, they have only played 2 games. They won a combined 6 of 30 from 3. Do think that that goes northward. St. Bonaventure always does a relatively solid job of being able to guard the arc, and I do think that for the Bonnies, they do a nice job of being able to win from within. I do think that they find a way to cover this number. Set my line at 10.5. I'm going to be willing to lay that number, and set my total at a 142.5. I do think that Sena going to look to push a little bit more tempo this year, so I'm going to be in on that total over. 685, 686 on the card. Marshall plays host to Elon. Elon finds themselves as underdogs of 9.5 points. 152.5 is the total. Made a total of 145. I'm in on the under. Elon was outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game last season, and Marshall, ever since the changeover, no longer are they under the tutelage of Dan D'Antoni. They're a team that they slowed down a little bit last season as well, and this is the Matthew Von Coleman revenge game, as he was playing for Elon last year. He's one of the best shot blockers in all of college basketball. He's averaging 3 blocks per contest, staying 7'4". Well, he's now on the Marshall team that was 117th in the country last year in terms of total possessions per game. That was a big giant step down for them in comparison to past seasons, and for Elon, you lose the Simpkins brothers in the backcourt, so they're under a lot of transition. They're looking to a little bit of positionless basketball. 6'8" guys in Kapper Klonzich, who began his career over at St. Joe's, and Chandler Cottrell, who was a nice 6 rebound per game guy over at Fort Wayne last season. They're really having to take hold of the offense, and it looks like Klonzich is going to be a little bit of point forward for this team. They're also going to be dealing with Jawan Carr having the ball in his hands quite a bit as well. Comes on up from the non-D1 ranks, but it's a lot of mixing and matching. This is an Elon team that it doesn't seem like they're going to have a lot of 3-point shooting this season. They're going to be looking to be able to do a rock solid job down low, but Marshall, I think, should be able to outgun them with that regard, with being able to bring in Van Coleman. And then additionally for Marshall, you bring back Jalen Spear from a year ago, who he had a rough time in non-conference play. It was only averaging 7 or 8 points per contest, and then he was able to go off for double figures in the second half of the season. Was an ace scorer over at Florida A&M a few seasons ago, and the big key is having someone like Caleb Hollenbeck, who comes on up from the non-D1 ranks, where he was a nice contributor to be able to give them some production. He's a guy that they think relatively highly of. Additionally, they brought in Noah Oates-Shooty, who, hopefully I said that correct. He comes over from the country of Canada. He's given the team 23 points in the first 2 games of the season. And Wilson Dubinsky, who he was over at Hampton a season ago, he comes in, he's able to give the team a little bit of contribution as well. I think that Marshall is going to be struggling a little bit with their 3-point shot, but I don't think that they're going to be taking a ton of threes. First 2 games of the season, they really did let it rip from 3-point range, but I think that that was just due to the fact that they were playing some interesting competition going up against Toledo and UMass, a UMass team that they'd love to be able to do a nice job of guarding you down low. With Elon losing Von Coleman, I do think that this unit is going to be looking to Von Coleman to really be able to just pound it down low, and I do think that for Marshall, they win from within. I set my line at 11. I'm going to lay it with the Thundering Herd, and I'm in on the under. Semi-total 145. 687, 688 on the card. East Tennessee State, they are playing us in Northern Kentucky, and the Norse are an underdog of 6.5 to 7.5 points. And total on this game, you're going to be getting that between a 143 to a 143.5. And with Northern Kentucky, I set them as an underdog of 12 points. I'm going to be willing to lay it with ETSU. Northern Kentucky just loses so much of that backcourt from a season ago. Sam Vincent was able to do a really good job for a long time, even though he was always dealing with injury, but I knew he was a guy that could generate some turnovers. Northern Kentucky over the last few seasons has not been a great 3-point shooter. Now, they look to Donovan Ode, who was a little bit of a do-it-all guy over at Cal State Fullerton last year. Put up some solid numbers with 12.5 points, threw in their 5 boards, but he was a part of one of the worst teams in all of college basketball, on a team that had no point guard whatsoever, so that's a little bit of an issue. Your main holdover is Dan Gretzinger, who last season, he was a rock-solid player, was averaging about 7.5 points per contest, shot 34% from 3, but in conference play is really where he took off. He was shooting 39% from 3, was able to give you 2.5 assists per game, so he took some nice strides forward, and then you bring back LJ Wells, who was able to give you about 6 or so rebounds per game, but again, you're really lacking that 3-point shooting. You're going to be relying upon Dozer going on over from the non-D1 ranks to be able to take some strides forward, and it's a lot of mix and match in this backcourt for a Northern Kentucky team that year in and year out, they're outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game. There's not a lot of reason to believe that they're going to be much better on offense this year. I recognize it was against Tennessee, but they're held to 56 points in that game. And then for East Tennessee State, this is a team that typically typically is reliant upon the glass under Brooks Savage. They do lose quite a few of those big men from a season ago, but they did a nice job of reloading. You bring in Cam Morris, who was a rock-solid player over at UMass Lowell last year. Last year, about 8.5 points, nearly 5 boards per contest. He's been a career about 32% three-point shooter, so he stretches the floor a little bit. Brady Crump is going to be looking to get Crump after. He was a nice ancillary piece over at Elon last year, like 4.5 points, 3.5 rebounds per game off the bench. And for ETSU, big thing is just being able to dole out the ball with good, clean offense. I think that Alan Strouthers is going to be a big part of this. Not a guy that's ever really been too much of a scorer, but he averages 2.5 assists per contest. He throws in there a steal per game. When you need him to, he's able to give you a little bit more in terms of driving to the rim. It's never been too much of a jump shooter, but I do think that that's going to keep things relatively slow and controlled. And bringing in Jalen Smith, who was over at North Florida last year, where he was bombing it at about 35% from 3, 5.5 assists per game, I think that gives ETSU the balance need to be able to take down a Northern Kentucky team that it just feels like it's in a lot of transition from a season ago. So circumstance where I did set my total here out of 142, I'm going to be willing to lay with ETSU, and I'm in on that 143.5 under. 689, 690 on the card. It is Indiana playing us to UW Milwaukee. Milwaukee is a 22.5 to a 23.5 point dog, and your total is 162.5 to a 164. Set my total at 162.5. At the 164, I do like the under for UW Milwaukee. They're going to be looking to once again be able to control the glass. That's what they were able to do last season under JaMychal Stillwell, and they lose Stillwell from a season ago, but you still have a lot of size. You got someone that began his career over at SMU, and Danilo Janovic, who stands 6'8". He's been averaging about 6.5 rebounds per game. You've been able to get some good contributions as well out of a big man in Saku Kone. He's been able to give you about 4.5 rebounds per game, comes on up from the non-D1 ranks, and this is a Milwaukee team that is going to leave something to be desired with their three-point shooting. Seth Hubbard comes in after he was over at Western Michigan and Toledo in recent years. Career only about 32% three-point shooter, but 2 years ago over at Western Michigan, he was ahead of the snake for that team, about 14 points per contest. I do like what he brings to the table in this backcourt along with Amar Uyugard, who is a very highly touted junior college transfer a few seasons ago. He left Fresno State before the whole gambling situation took hold, so that's a good thing. And Aaron Franklin is a veteran in this backcourt as well. You also have some sides with Faison Fields, but Indiana right now looks very, very revamped in terms of the offense. As you look at the DeVries system when he was over at West Virginia last year, that was a really good defense that left something to be desired on offense. That's because Tucker DeVries was out of the system for pretty much the entirety of the season, and he is making a big giant difference right now with regards to this backcourt. He has been putting in their 22.5 points and had a very nice game against Marquette, and that went a few nights ago, so you do absolutely love to be able to see that. And you've had a lot of these guys be able to make that leap on up from the mid-major ranks very, very successfully. Lamar Wilkerson, who was playing over at Sam Houston State last year, where he's always been a good three-point shooter, career about 40% three-point shooter. Well, he's had 42 points in the first 2 games of the season, and then you've been able to have Tatum Connerway, who was a little bit of this and that guy over at Troy last season, do a nice job contributing as well. Sam Alexis, he's got some size to be able to bang with UW Milwaukee down low, but I do think that for Milwaukee, the fact that they do such a good job on the glass, the fact that they do have some veterans that have been around the system, that's going to be enough for them to be able to take hold, and you do have to wonder if this is a little bit of a letdown spot after they completely took it to Marquette a few nights ago. I did set my line at 18.5, so going to be willing to take those points with the UW Milwaukee, and I do like this total under as well, so my total at a 162.5. 691, 692 on the card. It is VCU playing against the St. Peter's. St. Peter's is a 21.5 point underdog. 146.5 to a 147.5 is the total. So my total at a 147.5. So at a 147 or less, I am in on the over. Now, St. Peter's, year in and year out, outside the top 3 in terms of total possessions per game. Very much a defense-oriented team. Meanwhile, the Phil Martelli Jr. style, when he was over at Bryant last year, they were a top 10 team in terms of total possessions per game. So you've got a duel of clashing styles, but it does appear as though St. Peter's is a little bit down with regards to their defense this year. They've given up a combined 160 points in their first 2 games of the season, albeit they face off against an up-tempo Fairleigh Dickinson team, but the 77 that they gave up to Seton Hall, that's not necessarily great. And they do return a few guys from a season ago. Like, I like what Bryce Eaton is able to bring to the table last year. 11 points, 2.5 assists per contest, nice little this and that sort of gadget guy. And then you bring back Brett Bland as well. Bland is a guy that's been around the block in college basketball and has always been a nice ancillary piece for St. Peter's. The guy that was able to give you about 4.5 points, few boards, a steal per contest a season ago, but you don't have as much size down low with Mohammed So now being out, so they're going to be relying upon Sakara Williamson, who began his career over at Buffalo's in season number 2 of the system, to really be able to pull in those rebounds. And on the other end, you've got a VCU squad that just has a lot of talent up and down the boulevard. You bring in one of the top 100 freshmen in all of college basketball and Mr. Nick Lewis has looked very good here in the early going, 29 points in the first 2 games of the season. You have Brandon Jennings as a main holdover from season ago. He's only given the team about 3 to 4 points per contest, but he's going to be able to do a nice job in terms of helping facilitate this offense. And then additionally, you've got a lot of firepower. Jadion Tracy, who saw good minutes over at Oregon last year, coming into this program. Lisa Djokovic at 6'10". He's got versatility to be able to pop it from 3-point range, 6'10" size to be able to help out down low. This is not going to be a VCU team that's going to be like menacing on the glass, but Barry Evans, he made the switch on over with his coach and Phil Martelli Jr. on over to VCU as well. This is a team with a lot of depth. They've been playing pretty much 10 different guys for over 12 minutes a game. I do think that with VCU, they're going to be looking to run. I do think that they get the job done here against St. Peter's. I think that this has gone a little bit too far because you do have a new look VCU team with a lot of guys trying to get to know one another. I did set my line at 19.5. I do think that the St. Peter's defense does just enough to be able to help them cover this game. So this is a circumstance where I'm going to be in on a 147 or less over, and with VCU setting them as a 19.5 point favorite, we'll take 20 plus here with St. Peter's. 693, 694 on the card. St. Joe's, they hope to not be average Joe's on the road against Virginia Tech, and Virginia Tech is a 10.5 to a 12.5 point favorite. Total on this game, it is a 156.5. Set by total at a 156. So here at the 156.5, I'm going to be willing to dive in on the under for Virginia Tech. It looks like Nicolas Avadeas is going to be just a really good player. He comes in from the country of Greece. He at 6'8" is able to handle. He's able to pop it from 3-point range, and I mean, this has 2 game sample size, but 41 points, 8 boards, and 15 assists. That includes a game against Providence, and you got Toby Luau, who's back from a season ago. Last year at 6'8", shot it in the mid-30s from 3. He's a really good rebounder for the team, as he and Amari Hansberry have been able to really do a nice job on the glass. Both are averaging 12 plus rebounds in the first 2 games of the season. Then you've got Tyler Johnson in that backcourt as well. Jaden Schutt, he's a guy that returns from the season ago, so I really do like what Virginia Tech is bringing to the table there. Could only set my line at 10 though, because with St. Joe's, I know that they had the late offseason coaching change, and I know that things were a little bit less than savory for them over the weekend, but they still found a way to be able to win that Drexel game by 11, and they bring in Deuce Jones, who I really liked over at LaSalle last year, where he's a nice double-figure scorer, mid-33-point shooter. He just makes things happen out there on the floor. You bring back one of the better shot blockers in all of college basketball, in Justice Ajabor, who he's not going to give you a lot of scoring or anything like that, but is rock solid down low, and he pairs up very well with Steven Solano, who he was a former top 250 recruit, a true 7-footer, so this team had some solid size, and then a lot of 6'6" wings like a Jaden Glover, who he just wasn't able to see any playing time last season over at St. John's, but he's got some upside to him. Derek Simpson, who began his career over at Rutgers, so I actually really do like the St. Joe's team and the way that they are just built in general. I think that they're going to do a nice job in terms of not necessarily winning that battle down low against Virginia Tech, but I think that they hold in there. They do have the size to be able to give a little bit of speed bump to Avadeas as well, so I just saw a total here at a 156. I think that the total has gone just a little bit too high here. I'm going to be willing to take that 156.5 plus under, and I'm going to be willing to take anything above 10 here with St. Joe's. 695, 696 on the card. UTSA meet for the Roadrunners. They are on the road against Texas State, and Texas State is a 1.5 point favorite to a 1.5 point underdog. Some places have a flip of favorites here. Total on this game, it is 148.5, and I say UTSA is the 2-point favorite, so I'm going to be in on San Antonio here, whether that be as a money line underdog or laying a point and a half. Now, for UTSA, less than tremendous effort a few nights ago as they get it taken to them by SIU Edwardsville. That was a little bit embarrassing. I'm a believer in Austin Claunch and his system, though. This guy always does a good job in terms of his teams generating turnovers, a top 50 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. Now, no longer do you have a guy in Primo Spears who was putting in their 20 plus points per contest, so you've got a little bit of changeover in the backcourt, and I do think that Austin Nunez, a former top 100 recruit who spent some time over at Arizona State and Ole Miss, but just really didn't find really too much of a role there. He's going to be able to step up. This is going to be a team with a little bit more size as well, and they've got a bit of an upside guy in Pierce Spencer, who he was actually over at Nichols with our good friend and Mr. Austin Claunch to begin his career. Has always been a relatively good player in terms of generating turnovers, a career about 1.3, 1.4 steals per contest. Not going to be a dominator in terms of his offensive game, and that does lead me to believe that UTSA might be taking a little bit of a step back with regards to that offense, but I do think that they're going to be able to do a relatively solid job down low. Mo Njai is someone that at 6'10" has been been around the block a little bit, spent some time over at SMU and Eastern Michigan, so I do think that he's going to be able to help them out in the post. And for Texas State, they lose so much of that backcourt from a season ago. Now, I do like the fact that they brought back Mark Drone. He was a very highly touted junior college guy that was limited to like 10 games or maybe even a little bit less last season due to injury, and they did bring in compound transfers. They went the Louisiana Monroe route as Mekhi Willis. What's up, Willis? He last season over at Monroe was a little bit of a do-it-all guy, 10.5 points, 7.5 boards, shot 36.5% from three-point range. I do love what he's able to bring to the table. Additionally, you've got Caden Gums, who's back from a season ago, who's a mid-33 point shooter. He puts in there some good contributions. And then Jalen Bolden's the other guy that comes over from Louisiana Monroe. He last season, nice rock solid 13 points per contest. Not a great three-point shooter, but is going to give you some rebounding. It is a little bit of an undersized Texas State team, though. You've got a lot of guys that stand like 6'6", 6'7", that are looking to be able to make things happen along the perimeter. They are a team that, despite not having a lot of size, they don't take a lot of threes either, which is strange because they're actually a really good three-point shooting team. So I do think that in this case, UTSA going to be able to generate some turnovers, as this Texas State team, they've had 42 turnovers in their first 3 games of the season. I think that allows UTSA to find a way to get the job done. Say UTSA is a 2-point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to take a shot on them, whether that be as a small favorite or as a money line underdog. And with this total set mine at a 150, they could get some late game fouling, and Austin Clonches seems always look to run, so I'm going to be in on that over. 697, 698 on the board. Marquette plays outside of Little Rock. Little Rock, 19.5 to 20.5 point underdogs, 157.5 to 158.5 is the total. And I said Little Rock is a 17.5 point underdog. I'm going to be willing to take those points. Now with Little Rock, they are once again without KK Robinson. Second straight season that he goes out with an injury before the season starts. Just absolutely brutal for the kid, but they return one of their top guys from 8 seasons ago, Jonathan Lawson. Lawson was a complete dominator, 15.5 points, 5 boards, 3.5 assists, shot 43% from 3 points, so love what he's able to bring to the table. And to Kakic, hopefully I said that correct. He began his career over at Florida. Long winding road for the 6'9", relatively good shot blocker throughout his career. He's been able to give you about 1.2 blocks every 19 minutes per contest. He's always doing a nice job on the post last year. Was able to give this team 6 boards per game, and it's a Little Rock team that last year they were brutally bad with regards to their offense. They were outside the top 275 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but top 75 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Did a really nice job of being able to guard within the post. They're a good team on the glass as well, and I do think that that's going to keep them lively against a Marquette team that they're not necessarily looking to specialize in terms of their post play. This is a Marquette team that is going to be looking to generate turnovers. That I will say for Little Rock, they were outside the top 300 in terms of ball security last year, so this is sort of a case where you've got both teams with their weaknesses being exposed a little bit. Marquette has found that go-to guy in Chase Ross. He's done a nice job averaging 19 points per game thus far this season. He figures to take over that Cam Jones sort of role, and you do have some size with 6'11" Ben Gold, who he's shooting in the mid-30s from 3-point range. He's rock solid, but you're going to need to continue to have someone like Demarius Owens, who's only been averaging about 5.5 points per contest, be able to take some strides forward. Trey Norman has not really given you too much this far this season. It's been a lot of Royce Parham and Zayd Lowry. Lowry is a guy that last season was relatively glued to the bench, but now he's starting to step up for the team a little bit more, and it's just a Marquette system. They don't hit the transfer portal at all. They did not bring in a single guy via the transfer portal. And maybe that's a little bit to their detriment because they are down with their three-point shooting thus far this season. They've only been able to shoot in that neighborhood of about 29.5% from 3. Now, much of that was because they had that lambasting at the hands of Indiana, and they're not going to be playing Indiana every single night, so they feel very good about that. But that said, I do think that this is a circumstance where with Little Rock, that tough-minded defense, being a team that likes to slow things down a little bit, despite the fact that they have their turnover woes, that does keep them in it. I did set my total 155. Now, if this appears to be a Marquette team that's going to be willing to run, but I just don't know if Little Rock does their part with the total, but I do think that they hold up with their defense. I'm in on the under and the points here with Little Rock, 699, 700 on the card. It is NC State. They play host to UNC Greensboro, and Greensboro is an underdog of 28.5 points. 154.5 to 155.5 is that total, and I did set a total here of a 151. I'm in on the under. Greensboro last year was outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game, and misnomer on Will Wade. I know that his team put up over 100 points in their first game of the season, but his teams really don't play fast. Like, you take a look at what he did over at McNeese the last 2 seasons, his teams in both seasons were outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game. They were top 35 teams in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Now, with this roster having Trey Holloman coming in from Michigan State, where he was a nice facilitator, and Darion Williams, he was one of the main guys for that Texas Tech team that made the Elite Eight, I do think that they're going to be playing a little bit faster, but you still have some of Will Wade's guys coming coming on over from McNeese, like Kadir Copeland, who last year at 6'6" was giving out 4 assists, throwing in there some boards. He just does a little bit of everything. You're bringing a guy like a Jerry Dang, who is toying with the idea of going into the NBA draft as well. Rock solid reserve over at Florida State last season with a little bit of stretchability, career about 38% three-point shooter, and with all the size, I do think that it's going to be a little bit tough for Greensboro to stay in this game. It's a very new-look Greensboro team that has to replace 9 out of their top 10 scorers from season ago, but we saw them give a really nice first half against Kansas State before they unfortunately got bludgeoned in the second half, and I do think that the just overall rebounding that they brought in is going to be enough for them to be able to hold in there. You bring in a guy like a Justin Neely, who he's a 6'5", bit of a gadget guy that was over at Albany last year, 11.5 points, 7 boards, not a guy that's going to light you up from 3, and Greensboro has been a top 75 team in terms of three-point shooting each of the past 2 seasons. I think that that's coming to an end here, and the fact that they're without Valentin Pinedo, who was relatively solid over at St. Francis, Pennsylvania last season, that does hurt them a little bit, but you've got 6'10" Domas Kazunas, who was one of the main holdovers from a season ago. He should be able to give this team a little bit of size, do a nice job down low for this team. They're trusting in the likes of KJ Younger and Leland Marvel, a pair of freshmen in the backcourt, so they are in a little bit of transition there, but I do think that they hold in this game with Antoine Jones bringing a bit of leadership, and I think that he's now on team number 5. He actually might be on team number 6. Like, this is a guy that was playing college basketball pre-COVID. It's just absolutely insane that he's still seeing minutes, but I mean, he's a career about 33% three-point shooter. He's able to give you some nice scoring if you need him to. He's able to facilitate. I think that the UNC Greensboro team under Mike Jones, who's a guy that I very much believe in as a coach, does just enough to be able to hold in this game. I set my line at a 27. At 28 plus, I'm going to be willing to take those points with the Greensboro, and I do think the Greensboro looks to slow it down. I'm in on the under, set my total 151. 701, 702 on the card. Houston plays those to Oakland. Oakland is an underdog of 20.5 to 29.5 points. 139.5 is the total, and for Houston, I made them a 31-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. Now, Oakland, a very triumphant effort against Purdue. They don't win the game outright, but they were pushing Purdue for a full 40 minutes. You have to give credit where it's due to an Oakland team that they're based around a lot of junior college transfer guys. Like Isaac Garrett is a 6'8", little bit of a combo guy that dropped 40% from three-point range over at Salt Lake Community College last season. He pairs very well with Tabari Navarua, who he's a holdover from last season, a guy that was able to give the team 6+ rebounds per game, but really didn't have a lot of versatility. Garrett brings that versatility. You've got Brody Robinson, who is averaging 4+ assists per contest over at UT Arlington. That's big because then you bring in Coy Thurman, who is a top 40 junior college transfer according to JUCOrecruiting.com. He comes into the fold. Zaire Wells was highly touted junior college transfer, has given the team 35 points in the first 2 games of the season. So Oakland is doing a nice job of mixing and matching after the junior college guys. Well, they just weren't lighting it up from three-point range the way that you expect Oakland to. Last year, they were outside the top 275 in terms of three-point shooting percentage, and that's a big reason why that they did struggle. But now you have to go up against a Houston team that last year, they were in the bottom 10 in terms of total possessions per game. They were number 1 in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and it's taken a little bit of time for the freshmen to be able to find their footing, but Kingston Flemings has been able to prove himself to be a rock-solid scorer, and he's going to be playing off of Milos Uzan, who's able to do an amazing job of being able to find guys the ball. As Uzan, last year, he was able to shoot 40% from 3. He was selling out over 4 assists per game. He's one of the most versatile guards you're going to find in all of college basketball. The main concern for me, actually, with this Houston team is that you do lose quite a bit from down low, so now Joseph Tugler is that main guy, but Chris Senich, a 6'11" freshman, he's been able to step in, and he's had 23 rebounds in the first 2 games of the season. Guy that's been in the system for a very long time, and Mercy Miller might be able to give you a little bit of leadership as well. And then you've obviously got Emmanuel Sharp, a really nice sharp shooter as well to utilize a bit of a pun. I do think that for Houston, a team that has a tradition of being able to blow out opponents by a big giant margin, haven't necessarily been able to cover those first 2 games. Towson, I think, is just a really good team. And then Lehigh was a little bit pesky in that night number 1 matchup. I think that Houston restores order here, and they take it to an Oakland team that is better with their three-point shooting, but it's an Oakland team that last few seasons they've been outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game. So I did set a total here of a 137. I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the under end with Houston. Made them a favorite of 31 points, so I'm willing to lay that number. 703, 704 on the card. It is Southern Indiana on the road against South Dakota. South Dakota is a 4.5 point favorite total on this game. It is 164 to 164.5, and with South Dakota, I did set them as a 7.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the number. I've taken a shot on Southern Indiana the first few games of the season, and I have not loved what I've seen. They were leading throughout much of that game against VMI, and then they let go of the rope in the final few minutes as you've got a very much new look backcourt for the team. Ismail Habib was a top facilitator over at Portland State 2 seasons ago. He's come in and he's given the team 36 points in the first 2 games of the season. He's been rock solid. Trey Thomas was a 16-point per game scorer over at Bethune-Cookman last season. He's been okay for the team, but you take a little bit of a step down with regards to rebounding with having Stephen Olawani transfer on over to Oregon State. Now they're going to be looking to Devin Curtis, a 6'11" big man that comes in from Cal, where he was just glued to the bench, to be able to give you a bit of production. Caden Brown has been relatively solid thus far. He comes in from Wright St, where he was just not able to see a lot of minutes for them as well. But for Southern Indiana last year, a top 125 team in terms of 3-point shooting percentage. They have shot it here in the first 2 games of the season, very small sample size, but 25.5% from 3-point range, and it's clear that this is not the same team from distance that they have been in the past. Now, they do face off against a South Dakota team that they did a really good job of valuing the ball. They were number 1 in the country in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis. They're a top 40 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but they do lose one of the Bruns brothers. You've got Isaac Bruns back after Paul Bruns. He departs after he's just out of eligibility in general, but I do think that this team is going to be playing maybe a little bit slower, but they're going to be a little bit more in control because they get back Cameron Fenns, the 6'10/7' big man who last season went out midseason due to injury. When he was out, that's when things really took over for South Dakota, playing no defense whatsoever. You should be able to restore a little bit of roar there, and you've had a pair of freshmen in Vince Buzelis along with Jesse McIntosh be able to step in, combine for about 18.5 points, 11.5 rebounds per game. These guys have been rock solid, and I do think that for the South Dakota team, having Bruns in the backcourt to be able to lead things, and Porter Innen, he comes over after he actually had his brother, I believe, be able to play over at Liberty. He was a non-D1 guy that has stepped in right away. He's been able to give this team about 10 points per contest. I really like what he brings to the table. South Dakota, it feels like, has a little bit more depth than they did a season ago, so playing that up-tempo style is going to be bugging them a little bit less, and I do think that with South Dakota, they get the job done against a Southern Indiana team that just feels like they're in transition with that backcourt. Somebody told 165.5. South Dakota was brutally bad on defense, but they really look to push the tempo, and I think that they're going to do so here. I like the over, and I'm going to be willing to lay with South Dakota. 7-5, 7-6 on the card. Tulsa is on the road against Oral Roberts. Oral Roberts a 9 to a 9.5 point home underdog. So on this game, it is 159.5. Set at 12, 162.5. I do like the over. Oral Roberts actually brings in Corey Barnett, who was the assistant coach over at West Virginia last season. And West Virginia was very much a slow and controlled team, but I think that was a little bit more out of necessity. He was under the tutelage of Darren DeVries, and it's very clear that this team is going to be looking to run a little bit more this season. We saw that in their game against Oklahoma State, where both teams combined for darn near 100 points in that first half. So I do like the over, but I actually think that Oral Roberts holds in there. I only set them as a 2.5 point underdog. I like you too. Yamanachi Williams, he comes over after he was over at Lamar in Portland. He just dealt with injuries over the last few seasons, but he's a guy that at 6'10" is able to pop it from 3. 2 seasons ago over at Portland, shot 35.5% from 3 with 8.5 points, 5 rebounds per game. That is going to be hard to guard for this Tulsa team. Additionally, you've got a guy in Ty Harper who has been around the block quite a bit. He was over at Louisiana, Youngstown State, and Youngstown State, he did a nice job in terms of being a nice number 2, number 3 option for them. He was averaging 10 points per contest. Youngstown State was the top 100 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, but they did play with quite a bit of pace as well, and I think that that's very much going to be this Barnett style. And for Tulsa, they look like they have turned over a new leaf this year. This is not the same terrible Tulsa team that we've seen in the first few seasons under the guidance of Eric Conkle, who I do believe is a very good coach. I think that maybe he lost his way a little bit the last few seasons, but that said, I do think that the roar has been restored a little bit more with the Golden Hurricane, and I think a big reason why is because you bring in Miles Barnstable, who he was over at St. Thomas last season. He was their top scorer with about 14 points per contest, and David Green is probably going to be the best player in this game. Last season when he was over at Rhode Island, double-figure scorer at 6'7", shooting over 40% from 3, 5+ rebounds per game, and then you bring in Romad Dean, who's not necessarily like a explosive scorer or anything like that. He was over at Fordham last year, giving that team like 7 points, 5.5 rebounds per game, but career about 33% three-point shooter as a 6'7", a little bit of a this and that gadget guy. But for Tulsa, it's not like they're going to completely overwhelm an Oral Roberts team that looks to be a little bit thin with regards to their post play and their overall size down low. As Ian Schmeichel, he's back from a season ago after he had about 5 or so rebounds per game. He's like the lone guy that you can really trust in. That's above 6'7" for this Tulsa team, though. And I do think that with this Oral Roberts team, this is an intra-city rivalry. I think that they step up, and I think that they give them a good battle. I set my line at 2.5, so I'm going to be be willing to take those points. Semi-total 162.5 as well, so I'm also going to be in on this total over. 7-7, 7-8 on the betting board. Middle Tennessee is on the road against Evansville. Evansville is a 1.5 point favorite total on this game. It is 141.5 to a 142.5. So Middle Tennessee is a 3.5 point favorite. I like them outright on the money line. Now for Middle Tennessee, this is going to be their first game against a D1 team this year. They have played plenty of non-D1 teams, but they do return a few 6'8" guys with some stretchability and some just, I think, really good versatility. Kamari Lance, who I still remember, he was a top 100 recruit. He decided that he was going to just graduate from high school a year early. Probably not the world's greatest decision, but he's looked pretty rock solid for them. And ever since getting to Middle Tennessee, he has found a home last year, gave the team 8 points, was able to throw in there a little bit over an assist per contest. So he's got some nice stretchability. You got Alec Oglesby, who's been in college basketball for seemingly 100 billion years. Just was unable to get out there on the floor last year due to injury, but last you saw him over at Stetson, he was averaging 10.5 points per contest, and it's always been a career 39% three-point shooter. So I do think that Middle Tennessee is going to be pretty rock solid in terms of that backcourt. The front court, aside from the 1 year that they had Issa Mustafa, has always been a little bit questionable, but it's not like they're going up against an Evansville team that is necessarily too imposing down low. I remember a few years ago when they had Yasan Toomey, they were able to do a nice job there, and they do bring back Joshua Hughes. Hughes, I think, is going to be one of the mainstays for this team last year. He was able to give the team about 7 points, 5 rebounds per contest, has a little bit of stretchability, but only about a career 29% three-point shooter. And then you do have Connor Turnbull, who he began his career at the power conference level. He was a guy that last year was able to give the team some contributions down low as well. But they're really banking on Alex Hemingway to be able to step it up, because he was a really good three-point shooter when Clemson made the 2023 NCAA tournament. Last year, 7 points per contest, shot 47% from three, but was limited to 5 games the next year. Last season did not play at all. So very questionable as to what you're going to be able to get out of him. He's played 3 games thus far, and he's been able to give the team 8 points per contest, but is a little bit of a one-trick pony sort of guy, so that means that AJ Casey is really going to need to step up, and Casey had some power conference experience as well. He was over at Miami to begin his career. Last year was over at St. Louis, but just has never really been able to find his footing at any of those schools, and right now they're looking to Leif Mahler as their main facilitator. He comes over from the country of Germany, has not given the team any scoring whatsoever, but has been a relatively nice facilitator. That said, with this Evansville team, you do have to fear that with trusting in a freshman, going against a Middle Tennessee team that year in and year out, they're always one of the better teams in terms of being able to generate turnovers. Recognize it's a little bit of a new look backcourt, but you're bringing a guy in Sean Smith, who he was always solid over at Western Illinois, a guy that last year was averaging a steal and a half per contest. He fits his system relatively well, an okay three-point shooter. I do think that Middle Tennessee, despite the fact that their first 2 games were against non-D1 teams, they go on the road, they do find a way to be able to get the job done. I said Middle Tennessee as a result as a 3.5 point favorite on the road. I'm going to be willing to take a shot on them outright on the money line, and I think that this is going to be a game that's going to be close enough for late game felling. Middle Tennessee, a more mid-tempo team, and I do anticipate that you're actually going to be able to get a little bit of pace in this game as well from Evansville, semi-total at a 145.5, so I like the over as well. 7-09, 7-10 on the card. Missouri is playing against Minnesota. State with the smallest drinks in the union. Minnesota is a 6.5 to a 7.5 point underdog, and your total on this game is 156.5. Set a total of 163.5. I like the over, as Dennis Gates' teams always love to be able to run. Now, Dennis Gates' squad this year, it's a little bit more size. You've got Javon Porter, who's a 6'11", sort of a wing player over at Pepperdine, along with Loyola Marymount. Last few seasons has been a low to mid 33 point shooter. He's actually a relation to Michael Porter, who used to play over at Missouri for a very, very short amount of time. But I mean, you've got a lot of guys like that. They did bring in a true 7-footer from Arizona State, who should be able to help them out down low, give you a little bit more shot blocking than we've seen in the past. As I do think that Sean Phillips is going to be able to bring a little bit of rough and tumble, because that's always been the thing that has really lacked for Missouri ever since Dennis Gates got there. The team has been not really good on the glass, but you've got Mark Mitchell, has looked very versatile to begin the season. First 3 games of the season, he's put in there 62 points. He's had a combined 21 rebounds, so you have to absolutely love what he's been able to bring to the table. And additionally, Anthony Robinson is a guy that's back from season ago, Sebastian Mack as well. These guys do a really nice job in terms of being able to own and just be able to uplift this backcourt. I think that they're going to be able to do a nice job in concert with one another, and that's a big reason why I did set Missouri here as a 7.5 point favorite. With Missouri, I do think that they're going to be able to do a solid job against a Minnesota team that I think that there's going to be very, very great days moving forward for Nico Medved. I think that he's one of the best coaches in all of college basketball, and he did bring with him one of his guys from Colorado State, and Jalen Crocker Johnson, who does a nice job down low. He's at 6'5", 6'6", able to pop it from 3, and Cade Tyson Keep in mind, 2 years ago when he was over at Belmont, he was giving you 15 points per game, shot over 44% from three, just couldn't get out there on the floor for North Carolina last year. He and Bobby Durkin have really good versatility. You've got a guy in Robert Viola who comes over from San Jose State where he was averaging 6+ rebounds per game. So I don't think that this team is going to be overly intimidated down low. It does feel like, though, for Minnesota, they are going to need to figure out just their rotations with regards to the backcourt. Isaac Kusama has really been the main facilitator for this team, and thus far it's worked out well, but for this Minnesota team, untested thus far, you play against Elkhorn State and you play against Gardner-Webb, two of the worst defenses in all of college basketball, and I do think that with this Missouri team, they're going to be able to generate some turnovers. I think that Missouri, on their home floor, they find a way to be able to get the job done. I set my total here at a 163.5, so I'm going to be willing to take a shot on that over, and I'm going to be willing to lay up to 7 here with Missouri. 7-11, 7-12 on the betting board. UT Martin is on the road against Bradley. The Braves of Bradley are 14.5 to 15.5 point favorites, and your total on this game, it is 142.5, and with UT Martin, I set them as a 14.5 point underdog, so being able to get 15 plus, I'm going to be willing to take those points. For UT Martin, this is the international men of mystery. I know that I call a few teams that, but they truly are the international men of mystery. How about 13 international players on the roster, and Jeremy Schulman, who he was a very successful junior college coach, has done a great job of being able to bring it all together. And you just have so much positionless basketball. Like right now, each of your top 5 scorers as far this season for this UT Martin team all stand between 6'6" and 6'9". They don't necessarily have that one guy that's going to be a complete dominator down low, but you've just got a lot of guys up and down the boulevard that are able to pop it from 3-point range, you're able to guard everyone out there on the floor, and they've been able to get some good facilitation out of Filip Rajovic, who he's a guy that began over at Serbia. He's been within the program over the last few seasons, was a part-time starter for them last season. It looks like he's really going to be taking the reins at the point guard spot for this team. You've got Afran Trinka, hopefully I said that correct. He comes over from Serbia and Herzegovina. He's another guy that was a part-time starter for them last season, was able to put in there 8 points, 3 assists per contest as well. So these guys work really well off of one another. You've got AJ Hopkins, who's one of the few non-international men of mystery, and he's another guy that he returns from a season ago after he was a highly touted junior college guy as well at 6'6", just lots of versatility. And for Bradley, I do believe that they're better than the night number 1 loss that they took against St. Bonaventure. They're going to be in a little bit of transition though after they were a top 5 team in all of college basketball in terms of their 3-point shooting. They lose like 4 of their top 6 scorers from a season ago, though they do bring back Demarion Birch. Birch was a guy that was primarily a reserve last season. He was able to give the team 6 points per contest, and he shot 56% from 3-point range. It was a very small sample size, but he shot 56% from 3-point range. I think that's doing for a little bit of regression this season, but he also bring back Corey Thomas at 6'9". He was able to pop it at about a 37% clip from 3. Was another guy that was a primary reserve, giving you about 4 to 5 points per contest with this Bradley team. I think that they're going to get back to their roots a little bit more of good rebounding as they bring back the 7'1" big man in Ahmet Janovic. I think that they're going to be featuring a little bit more of him. And then they went the international route as well. Kai Yu, who comes on over from China, he's a true 7-footer. You've got Timmy Vanderknapp, who he gives you a little bit of size as well. But the guy that is really going to need to bring this offense together is Montana Wheeler. That's a great name, by the way. Comes on up from the 91 ranks. They've really been trusting in him to be able to facilitate for the guys like Juwan Johnson, Alex Gerse, and company. And I do think that with Bradley, they do find a way to be able to persevere here. But I think the UT Martin is going to be looking to fly a little bit more. I think that they're going to be looking to play that positionless basketball. We saw them hang north of 80 points up on the board against UNLV that night number 1 game. So I set my total here at a 150.5. I do like the over, and at 15 plus, I'm going to be willing to take those points with UT Martin. 7-13, 7-14 on the card. Cal Poly is on the road against Colorado State. Colorado State 17.5 to 18.5 point favorites on this game. It is 165.5, and I did set my total at 165.5 as well. Seeing 164 out there, I'd be willing to take a shot on that over. Anything of 165 or less, I'm in on the over. Cal Poly, they were just absolutely flying last year. Year number 1, or Mike DeGeorge, saw a big giant tempo change with them. They were a top 10 team in all of college basketball in terms of total possessions per game, and there are some teams that are catching up to them. But for Cal Poly, even though they do lose a lot of what they had from last season, they do lose 4 of their top 5 scorers, they're still very much staying true to their style. And for Cal Poly, I do think that their just positionless style in general is going to be able to help them be able to hold in there a bit in this game. I did set my line at 15.5. I'm going to be willing to take those points. They're going to be looking to a lot of Caden Ward, who he's a guy that last year was giving the team about 7.5 points per contest as a priority reserve, 35% 3-point shooter. He and Peter Benjai are the main returners, and they've been combining for 29 points per contest between the two of them to begin the season. You've also had Jake Davis, who he began his career over at Illinois. If I'm not mistaken, he was over at Evansville as well. He's been able to give you a bit of facilitation. Hasn't necessarily been able to give give you too much on the scoring front, but you also have a little bit more size than a season ago in Ali Asarin, who he comes over. He's been able to give this team at 6'9", just a little bit more stretchability than what they had last season. And Ali Faroukmanesh, it's been 2 games thus far, but so far so good for him. His teams were able to get the job done in blowout wins in both of them. And Kyle Jorgensen, one of the main holdovers from a season ago, 40 points in the first 2 games of the season, but I think the main attraction here might actually be Kerry Booth. Kerry Booth was seeing some really good minutes a few seasons ago over at Notre Dame when he was a part-time starter that was flying about 6.5 points, 4.5 boards. He's capable of shooting threes at 6'10", not necessarily his forte though. And Brandon Rechsteiner, just out of necessity for Virginia Tech because they had the whole Heiser Miller situation where he got suspended before the start of the season with the gambling situation over at Temple. He became the main point guard, and he's been able to give this team a little bit of leadership in the backcourt along Jevin Muniz. I do like this backcourt of this bunch, but I do think that Cal Poly, just with the way that they absolutely gun it, they give you just a style that you don't see in general. I do think that that's going to be a little bit difficult for Colorado State to be able to take advantage of. Now, with Colorado State, they play at elevation, so I do think that this could be a case where Cal Poly gets a little bit tired out towards the end of the game, but I think that Cal Poly does just enough to be able to hold in there. I set my line at a 15.5, so being able to get 17.5 plus, I'm going to be willing to take those points with Cal Poly, and at a 165 or less, I'm in on the over. 7:15, 7:16 on the board. UC San Diego is on the road against Fresno State. Fresno State, a 1.5 point favorite total on this game, 149.5 to 115.5. Semi-total 152.5. I do like the over, and I say UC San Diego is a 4.5 point favorite. I recognize that UC San Diego loses so much from a season ago when they were able to make the NCAA tournament, but they stayed true to their style with Clint Allard taking over as the new coach for this team, and he doesn't retain a ton from a season ago. A guy like a Bull Dengit, who he comes down over from Portland, he very much fits the system, though, as last year over at Portland, he was giving that team 7.5 points, 4 boards, shot about 38% from three-point range at 6'11". I mean, that's not what you were able to get out of Tiat Jones and company from a season ago, but still, that's really nice versatility. You've got Tom Beatty, who comes over from Hawaii. He was a guy that over at Hawaii last season was seeing some stars. He was able to contribute for that team, a few boards, an assist and a half per contest. Not necessarily an amazing three-point shooter, but nice on-ball defender, and that's what UC San Diego's built around. They were a really nice three-point shooting team a season ago, but they were a team that did an amazing job with regards to their turnovers, and you bring in Alex Shulkin, who last season over at Lafayette was shooting over 45% from three-point. I really love the way that this team has mixed and matched, and they get to face off against a Fresno State team that last season was outside the top 3 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. Vance Wahlberg's teams are looking to run. Like, they were a top 25 team in terms of total possessions per game. The problem was the execution, because they really don't do a great job of taking care of the ball. Here in the first 3 games of the season, they've been averaging over 14 turnovers per game, as they're looking to Jake Heidbreder, who was a really nice double-figure scorer a few seasons ago over at Air Force. Spent some time at Clemson as well. Didn't see a lot of minutes there. They're relying upon him to be able to give this team some versatility, and Zion Collins is one of the main holdovers from what was a disaster of a year last year. Collins was solid. He was able to supply the team with 12.5 points per contest. He stayed out of the gambling ring, so good on him. Stealing half, 4.5 assists per game. So, I mean, he's actually a relatively rock-solid guard, but this is also a bunch that I think that they're going to have a tough time down low with UC San Diego as they bring in Willens Jacques, who's a 7-foot freshman from France. He should be able to give you a little bit of something down low, but they're looking to international men of mystery to be able to give you some rebounding. You really don't have a lot of size that returns from a season ago, and they're relying upon Deshaun Gary to be able to uplift this team a little bit, as well as he's, as a 6'6", a little bit of a wing player, is not necessarily going to pop it well from three-point range. Was a relatively highly touted recruit out of Victorville, California, which that's a major city just outside of Los Angeles, but that said, I do think that with regards to this UC San Diego team, the fact that they stayed from within, the fact that they're staying true to their style, I think that they find a way to get the job done, and I do think that this is going to be very much an up and down battle. I did set my total at 152.5. I like the over, and UC San Diego outright on the money line. 7:17, 7:18 on the card. Utah State is going to be playing us a Weber State, and the men of Weber do find themselves as a underdog of 28.5 points. 153.5 is your total. Somebody blind at a 17.5. I'm going to be willing to take the points with Weber State. Weber State was able to push Utah to overtime a few nights ago. This is a Weber State team that I think is very much improved from a season ago. Weber State over the last few seasons has really been featuring just one main guy. Blaze Threat was that guy last season. 2 years ago, it was just all about Dylan Jones and everything that he was able to do. This year for Weber State, it just feels like they've got a little bit more balance. You have been able to get 17 points per contest out of Jace Whiting, who began his career over at Boise State and UNLV, and Trevor Henning. Henning is a guy that was within the system last year, and he was a nice little bit like a number 3 sort of scorer. He was was giving you about 32% three-point shooting, 8 points per contest as a part-time starter, but has been able to take a nice step forward. But Nigel Burris, who ironically enough was at Utah State a few seasons ago, has always been a great three-point shooter, career 38.5% three-point shooter in season number 2 of the system. After last year, he gave the team 5 rebounds per game. He does a nice job of being able to lend some versatility. Got a lot of guys that they just stand 6'6", 6'8". They're all able to pop it from three-point range. They're giving you some relatively good rebounding. And against a Utah State team that they still have Mason Fosloff from a season ago, nice double-figure scorer, guy that I really like in the backcourt. And down low, you do bring back one of your top rebounders as well in Carson Templin. That helps him out quite a bit. And I love the addition of MJ Collins. Collins was pretty solid over at Vanderbilt last year. He was a little bit of a sixth man for them with about 7.5 points per game, but wasn't necessarily a great three-point shooter. Utah State last year was a top 40 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. I think they're going to be in that neighborhood once again. You bring in a guy in Kobe King, who I still remember at Tulane 2 years ago, 10.5 points, 38% three-point shooter. That's going to be up a little bit. And Tucker Anderson, when he was over at Central Arkansas, was a main go-to scorer for them as well. But I do think that the overall size along the wing for this Weber State team keeps them lively. Now you've had Utah State go 25 of 50 from three-point range in the first 2 games of the season. I think that there's going to be a little bit of cooler and regression. And for Utah State, with a little bit of transition with that backcourt, we have seen them turn the ball over a little bit more as Elijah Perryman is out seeing the ball in his hands quite a bit more. And I think that Weber State holds in there in a game where I do think that you're going to be able to get some points up on the board. Set my total 155.5. I like the over and the points here with Weber State. 719, 720 on the card. Oregon State plays us in North Texas. The Mean Green are a 2.5 point underdog, and your total on scheme between 135.5 to 136.5. And set my total at 137. I do like the over for North Texas. They bring in Daniel Robinson as their coach, who, when he was over at Cleveland State, his teams were somewhat low tempo, but they weren't as notoriously slow as we saw with North Texas in past years. This is not going to be quite the bottom 10 teams with regards to possessions per game, but I did set Oregon State as a 3-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay the very small number here. Wouldn't want to go past the 2.5, mainly because I think that Oregon State is going to be able to win from within. With Robinson's teams over at Cleveland State, they're always very good on the offensive glass, but the issue that they always had was being able to hold opponents to a one-and-done possession. Last year, 311th in all of college basketball with regards to their defensive rebound percentage. You bring over Dylan Arndt, who last season was one of the main guys over at Cleveland State. He was pulling in there about 7 rebounds for that team, so that helps out a little bit on the glass, but still a little bit of question mark. And Will McClendon, he does need to find his sort of footing for the North Texas team. He's been coming in off the bench for them, which is very surprising considering that's a man that began his career over at UCLA. He's been a rock-solid scorer just out there on the West Coast over at San Jose State last season, as it's really been Mr. Jashawn Stevenson who has been the main guy for this team. He comes on over after last year at Cleveland State. He was a bit of a sixth man for the team, 10 points, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range, contributed about a steal and a half per contest. He has really been taking hold of this team, and it is a team that it looks like they're very set on being able to generate some turnovers. We have seen this North Texas team generate about 18.7 turnovers per game in their first 3 games of the season. That includes a game against Loyola Chicago. And on the flip side of things, you've got a Oregon State team that I do think that they're going to do an okay job of being able to take care of the ball. Their backcourt is in quite a bit of transition after they lost to Marco Minor in the offseason, but Josiah Lake is a guy that stayed within the system. They did lose their top 3 guys from season ago, so it's very big that they were able to bring in a guy like Des White last season over at Missouri State, 14 points, 2.5 assists. He was able to shoot 37% from three-point range, so he's got all sorts of versatility there. Now, we have seen Oregon State have a little bit of a tough time holding onto the ball, 33 turnovers in their first 2 games of the season, but they also have the size advantage in this game with Yak Yak. That's a great name, by the way. He comes on over after he was over at New Mexico State to begin his career. 6'7" Isaiah C. has some versatility. He's back from a season ago. And then you've got a guy that I think is a little bit of an upside guy in Ore Diaz-Graham. He was over at Pittsburgh last season at 6'11". Noah Ammenhauser, he was a top rebounder over Coastal Carolina last season. I think that these guys are going to be able to allow Oregon State to be able to win from within. I think that you get a game that's going to be pretty tight with some late game following as well. So set my total at a 137. Oregon State last year outside the top 3 in terms of total possessions per game. Cleveland State not necessarily going to gun it, but I do think that you get just enough points up on the board because I think that North Texas is going to be able to get some run out layups with those turnovers to be able to get this over. So 1 to lay up to 2.5 here with Oregon State, and I'm going to be in on this total over as well. 721, 722 on the card. South Dakota State, they're on the road against Oregon. Oregon is a 16.5 point favorite, and your total is 146.5. I'm going to be willing to take the points with South Dakota State. As for Oregon, the good news is you get back Jackson Shellstead. He only missed 1 game with that hand injury. A lot of people thought that he was going to be missing for a little bit longer, but even with him back, the Oregon offense looked very disjointed. Now, defenses looked very rock solid. You bring back the 7-footer, Nate Biddle, who he was able to shoot about 33% from three, 7 boards, block and half per contest. He does a really nice job in terms of being able to stuff the stat sheet. And you also bring in a guy like a Sean Stewart, who was over at Ohio State. He brings with you a little bit of size as well, but it does appear as though this Oregon backcourt is going to be having a little bit of struggle. And for South Dakota State, this is just clearly not the same team that they have been in the past. They move on from their coach, Eric Henderson, who decided to take the Drake job in the offseason, but they still do have quite a bit of that backcourt from a season ago. So I do think that there's a little bit of upside with a South Dakota State team that just has not been the same three-point shooting team this year that they have been in past seasons. You return a guy like Kellen Gary, who last season he supplied the team with about 11.5 points per contest, shot 35% from three, gave out 2.5 assists per game. You've got Jaden Jackson now in the fold. Jackson was a guy that last season he was a little bit more of a sixth man for the team, 6 points, mid-30s three-point shooter. So I mean, you've got a lot of these guys that stay within the system. Now, what you don't have is a guy like an Oscar Clough who's able to completely dominate down low, but Damian Wilkerson, who stayed within the system, he's a guy that at 6'10" is going to give you some size. Matthew Moores is someone that at 6'7", 6'8", began his career over at Wisconsin. He should be able to give you a little bit of rebounding and a little bit of versatility as well. So I do think that with this South Dakota State team, they hold in there, and I just need to see it to believe it before I'm willing to lay a big number like this with Oregon. I did set my line at 13.5, and I do think that with Schultz back, that this Oregon offense is going to be taking over a little bit more. And South Dakota State, they become a little bit more of a mid-tempo team in recent years, but I do think that their three-point shooting that has been a little bit rough to begin the season, it starts to get going a little bit more. So semi-total at 147.5, you're at the 146.5. I like the over and the points with the Jackrabbits, 723, 724 on the betting board. It's Utah Tech, MNN from the Stan Sheriff Center out there in Hawaii. Utah Tech is a 3.5 point favorite. Tonight's game is 155.5, and I disagree with this one. I said Manhattan as a 5.5 point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to take a shot here on Manhattan. For Utah Tech, this is just not a team that really impresses me, and I think that Manhattan has a chance to be able to win the Metro Atlantic this season. With this Manhattan squad, they bring back a guy in Will Sidner, who at 6'7", 6'8", was a mid-30s three-point shooter, was able to supply that team with 14 plus points per contest. You've got a Manhattan squad that should be able to do a relatively solid job on the glass against a Utah Tech team that year in and year out, they're just really not able to do a good job of being able to hit the boards, as you've got 6'10" Mario Lubicic, hopefully I said that correct, gentleman for Croatia, couldn't really get out there on the floor last season, but here in season number 2, looks like he's starting to be able to give you a little bit more oomph down low. I do like what Fraser Roxborough was able to give you. He was limited due to injury last year, but in the 19 games that he played as a 6'7" combo player, was able to shoot 48% from three, will give you 8.5 points, 4 boards per contest in limited minutes. Love him. And then you've got Devin Dinkins, who he does a nice job of just making things happen in the backcourt. Last year, about 13.5 points, 44% three-point shooter against a Utah Tech team that year in and year out, this is always a team that has a tough time with regards to their defense. Last year, back outside the top 225 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. And for Utah Tech, they're very much based around three-point shooting themselves, but it's not like they necessarily have flamethrowers from three-point range this season as well. Utah Tech loses a lot of their top scorers from a season ago, like in Noah Gonsalves, so that means that you're going to be looking at a lot of Ethan Potter. He gives the team a little bit more off and double down low. This has been a Utah Tech team that has really struggled in the post, and being able to bring him in from Utah Valley, where he's been able to give the team 6.5 rebounds per game in his first 4 games, that does help this team a little bit. Noah Belonga, who he was over at St. Bonaventure, didn't see a lot of minutes for them. That was a nice shrewd pickup for them as well, but that's been at the expense of their three-point shooting, as they played 4 games as far this season. This team is shooting 27.8% from the outside, and with Manhattan, I recognize that this was a team that was a little bit up and down with their defense a season ago, but I do think that they're going to be able to do a good job of being able to hold in their down low against Potter and company. This is a backcourt that has been playing with one another for a very long time, and then I think that Terrence Jones, who he was over at Norfolk State last season, a nice guy that was able to give that team 6 points, a little bit of facilitation, not necessarily a great three-point shooter. He adds a lot to this defense as well, and I do think that out there on a neutral court, Manhattan finds a way to be able to get the job done. I set them as a 5.5 point favorite. I do like Manhattan in this spot on the money line. I feel like they should be the favorite, and with this total, I did set mine at a 153.5 with Utah Tech making a massive setback with their three-point shooting for past years, so I'm going to be in on this total under as well. 725, 726 on the betting board. It is Long Beach State, and they're going to be on the road against Pacific. I'll be specific. Pacific, they are a 10.5 point favorite. Total on this game, it is 144.5 to a 145.5, and for Pacific, going to set them as a 7.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the points. Now, I recognize that Long Beach State did not look impressive a few nights ago ago against Fresno State team that I do not think the world of, to say the least. But that's it for Long Beach State. I do think that there's a little bit of upside for them down low. You bring back your top rebounder in Derek Michael Siviero, who's been a little bit limited to begin the season, but last year was able to give the team 6 boards per contest. I think that he's going to be able to pick it up a little bit. You've got Peter Mestrovich, who he comes over from Syracuse. Last season saw a few minutes over at Syracuse. Wasn't necessarily too much of a scorer, but guy that's able to give you about 3.5 rebounds per game. And at 6'8", he actually did shoot 41.7% from 3. Very, very small sample size of 3-point shooting, but he had some 3-point shooting regardless. Shaquille Bender was a nice guard over at Manhattan last season, and I do think that you're going to be able to get a little bit more facilitation with Isaiah Lewis coming out over from Little Rock as well. This is a Long Beach State team that is looking to turn over a little bit of a new leaf. Chris Acker, who was an assistant over at San Diego State, he came into the fold, so this has been a Long Beach State team that has been a little bit more slow and controlled last year outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game. And for Pacific, they do return one of their top guys from a season ago, on Elias Ralph, like what he's able to bring to the table last year. 14 plus points per contest. Shot it from 3, but not necessarily well, at less than 30% from the outside. And now you've got Jaden Clayton to really be the head of the snake for this unit after Mo Odom last year was able to do a nice job in terms of being able to dole out the ball. Now you bring in a guy in Mr. Clayton, who he last season over at Maine was averaging 4.5 assists per game. Not too much of a primary scorer. He's been a less than 30% three-point shooter throughout his career, but is able to generate a steal and a half per contest. But that pairs well with TJ Wainwright, who he was over at Robert Morris and Long Beach State over the last few seasons, and at Long Beach State shot 40% from 3 last season. So nice upside guys there. And Alexis Marmoyoles just has not really gotten going. After last year, he was a nice double-figure scorer over at Lamar. So you've got some interesting pieces. For Pacific, they got down early in that game against Nevada. They clawed their way back. They only lose that game by 1. Very respectable effort there, but you don't necessarily have a ton down low with this team outside of Casey Ibikwe. He's the guy that has just been around the block in general and hasn't seen a lot of minutes for the team. He began his career over at Oregon State and Washington and just has never really been able to develop. I think that with Long Beach State investing a little bit more into their post presence, I do think that they're going to ugly this game up a little bit, and that's going to be able to hope they'll hold in there. I did set my total at 145.5. At the 144.5, I do think that this is going to be a game that's going to be close enough for late game filling, and having Clayton out there on the floor, I do think that Pacific going to be able to generate some turnovers, but I do think that that's going to be at the expense for lack of a better term, gambling for turnovers, and that'll lead to some open shots for Long Beach State as well. So at a 145 or less, I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the over, and I do like the points here with Long Beach State. 727, 728 on the card. Nevada is going to be playing us to Southern Illinois, and the Salukis, who find themselves as a 9.5 point underdog. So on this game, it is 150.5, and so Nevada is a 10.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay 10 with them. I was a little bit off put by the second half effort that we did see out of Nevada in that game against Pacific. They get up double figures. Looked like they were going to run and hide with that game, and then all of a sudden they let them back into the game. But that said, I do still think that this is a Nevada team that is going to be very rock solid in the backcourt. Last season, they were moving on from no longer having the likes of Lucas and company out there in the backcourt. Now you've got a little bit more of a rock solid group. I love the fact that they brought on Tayshaun Comer, who was a 14 point per game scorer over at Evansville last year, that's able to light it up from 3. Began his career over at Eastern Kentucky, where he was generating a lot of turnovers, and you return from down low Joel Armatrain, who doesn't give you a ton offensively. Last year only about 6 points per contest, but throws in their 6.5 boards, a little bit over a block per contest, so he does a nice job with his whole post presence, and this has been a Nevada team that's really been slowing down their tempo last year outside the top 300 in terms of total possessions per game, and now they're going to be able to generate more turnovers with bringing in Corey Camper. He was over at UTEP, a team that was very good in terms of generating turnovers last year. Camper, 10.5 points per contest, generating 2 steals per game, shot in the mid-30s from 3-point range, and I do think that that's going to take it out of a Southern Illinois team that they're very much looking to run. You're going to have dueling tempos here. You've got a Southern Illinois team that is coached by Scott Nagy. If you recall what he did when he was over at Wright St a few seasons ago, his team's absolutely gunned it, and they were able to put up a 100 spot against UMKC, which come to find out, it looks like UMKC is going to be looking to turn over a little bit of a new leaf as well. But you've got a few guys that return from the season ago. Davion Sykes, who began his career over at Texas State. He's been pretty rock solid for this team. Last year was a little bit more of an ancillary piece. 2 years ago over at Texas State, he was a guy that was able to supply about 11.7 rebounds per game, but he's not necessarily too much of a 3-point shooter. Prince Alajibi, who began his career over at Boston College, he's able to give you a little bit of rebounding at 6'8", but you don't necessarily have these explosive 3-point shooters. They're really banking on Isaiah Stafford, who missed all last year due to injury, but 2 years ago over at Valparaiso, he was just a dynamo. He was giving that team 17 points, 3.5 boards, 2 assists, steal and a half per contest. They're banking on him to be able to elevate the team, but he again was a guy that shot only about 29.5% from three-point range there, and I do think that with Nevada having such a good low post presence themselves, I think that Armatrain is going to be able to win that battle down low. Additionally, I do think that you're going to be able to get some good production out of Elijah Price, who comes on over from Fresno State, where he was giving that team 10.5 points, 8 boards, and he stayed out of the gambling scandal, so good on him. I do think that Nevada finds a way to be able to win from within. I do think that things are going to be pushed up tempo a little bit more. I did set my total at a 150.5. This is one where I'm seeing it at a 151, so at a 151 or higher, I'm in on the under, and I'm going to be one away with Nevada. 729, 730 on the card. It is Stanford, and they play us in Montana State. Montana State is an underdog of 14.5 points, and total on this game, it is 150.5 to 151.5, and with Samford, I did set them as a favorite of 15 points. I'm going to be willing to lay 14.5. Don't want to go any further, as Montana State, to begin the season, they had a nice performance against Colorado. I recognize that they lose that game, but really push them to the brink. Now, come to find out, Colorado's just not very good this year. We're going to call it what it is, but still, this is a Montana State team that you've got a few guys that are back from a season ago. Patrick McMahon, who's always been like an 8 to 9 point per game guy, just does a little bit of this and that. And Jed Miller was a guy that was a primary reserve for them 8 seasons ago, has been a career 34.5% three-point shooter. That's able to do it out. Last year, he was giving the team 2.2 assists per game as a little bit more of an ancillary sort of facilitator. You bring in Chris Hodges, who began his career over at Wisconsin, never got out there on the floor for them, but at 6'9", should be able to give the team a little bit more rough and tumble. But for Samford, recognize that you do lose a guy in Maximilian Radod, who was just absolutely tremendous for them last season, but you still have a guy in Chisholm Okpara, who when he was over at Harvard was a nice dominator down low. Last year, shot over 44% from 3 at 6'8". He's got great versatility. You also have some versatility with Ryan Archibald back from a season ago. He's been very limited in the first few games, so we might not even see him out there on the floor in this game. But Abuka Okere, who he has come in as a freshman, he has delivered for the team 55 points in the first 2 games of the season. Benny Gieler is a guy that has been in the system for quite a while. Last year, he took some nice strides forward, gave the team 6 points on 36% three-point shooting, so I love what he's able to bring to the table as a little bit more of a primary guard this season. Then Jeremy Dent-Smith, he's a guy with a little bit of upside as well, coming out over from the non-D1 ranks. He's been able to give this team a little bit of production as well. I just believe in Kyle Smith as a coach in general as well. His teams typically play a little bit more defense-oriented, a little bit more slow. You go back to his teams over at Washington State, they were traditionally outside the top 250 in terms of total possessions per game. Stanford was a relatively mid-tempo team last season. Montana State, not necessarily a team that's going to be gunning it themselves, so it makes it a very interesting handicap with this one, as I did set my total here at a 147. I do think that you get a little bit of a lower possession game. I do think that Montana going to have a little bit of a tough time heading on over there to Palo Alto, so I'm willing to lay up to 14.5 here with Stanford, and I'm in on the under, so my total 147, 731, 732 on the card. It is the Dons of San Francisco playing against Portland State. Portland State a 10.5 to an 11.5 point dog. Total on this game is 150.5. Set my line at a 151.5 with regards to the total, so I'm going to be in on the over for Portland State. This has been a squad that's played a few different styles over the last few seasons. They're a very interesting team to say the least, and I'm going to be willing to lay with San Francisco just because I do feel like this team in general has a lot of nice pieces, and I do like the fact that they brought in Mookie Cook, a former top 75 recruit that just wasn't able to find his footing over at Oregon, and I just don't know who on Portland State is going to be able to match up with him. Chase Colburn, I feel like, has done a nice job in terms of being able to mix and match his guys, but oftentimes he's had a lot of turnover with his teams. They actually did return a few nice pieces from a season ago. Todd Score and Jalen Henderson, who was averaging 13 points per contest, and Trayvon Minnow, who he began his career over at South Carolina. He's been in college basketball for like 500 million years, and as a starter for Portland State last year, 7.5 points, 7.5 boards, block per contest. You do like what he's able to provide down low, but San Francisco, I still think is going to be able to win that battle down low. And then you're taking a little bit of a shot on a guy in Bryson Long, who, if you go back many years ago over at Houston Christian, was averaging 15 points, 41.5% three-point shooting, but I mean, he's only played 6 games the last 2 seasons in college basketball, so he's a guy that's been very banged up throughout his career, so you do have a lot of question mark on that front. And then on the other end, you've got a San Francisco team that they do lose quite a few guys from a season ago, but bringing back Mr. Riley from a season ago is very big. Tyrone Riley was able to give you double figures at 6'6". He's able to pull in there some boards, shoot it relatively well from 3, and this is just a team that's loaded with size. David Fuchs was a 6+ rebound per game guy each of the last 2 seasons over at Rhode Island. 7'1" Seba Gilabrea. He's back after he began his career over at Georgia Tech. He's never been a primary scorer, but is a guy that's able to give you just a little bit down low in terms of shot blocking. And Ryan Beasley, he had a really nice run to end the season last year. Now, if you look at the career numbers, it's only been about a 32 or so percent three-point shooter, but in the last, we're going to call it I think it was 12 games of the season last year, he had scored in double figures in all but 3 of them, was shooting nearly 40% from three-point. I really like his upside in the backcourt. It's only put in there 10 points in the first 2 games that he's played in this season, but I do think that for the San Francisco team, they do a nice job of taking it to a Portland team that they just have been a little bit random with the way that they've been trying to generate turnovers. It's a Portland State team that last season they had a really nice facilitator in Keont Myers, who was giving the team 6 assists per contest. They really didn't do a great job of being able to replace him in the portal, in my opinion. I do think that leads to San Francisco being able to control things along the perimeter. I do think that San Francisco is going to be able to also win from within, and with San Francisco, very high-powered offense last season. So I did set my total here at a 150.5, at a 150.5 like I'm seeing right now. I'm in on the over, and I'm going to be willing to lay it with the Dons. 733, 734 on the card. Idaho is on the road against San Diego. The San Diego Toreros are a 1.5 point favorite. Tonight's game is 158.5. I did say San Diego is a 7.5 point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay it. I know that San Diego lost the other Idaho school in Idaho State a few nights ago. That was a little bit less than tremendous, and I do think that it needs to be called into question just if Steve Lavin is a joke of a coach at this point, because, man, this has not been great, his tenure over at San Diego. But that said, I do think that a new look backcourt is going to be able to find it here. You've got Tunari Lane, who was a double-figure scorer over at Georgia State last season, and then Dominique Bilford Tough. He actually began his career over at Idaho, so welcome back Potter sort of situation. But last few years over at Southern Utah, he was averaging for that team about 15.5 points. He was giving out 2 assists, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range. He just does a lot in the backcourt. And then this is a team that they bring in a little bit of size with Asane Diop, who began his career over at Colorado and saw some meaningful minutes over there at Colorado last year. He's a part-time starter, not too much of a scorer, but is a guy that's able to give you 4 rebounds per game, and that's going to be the key for the San Diego team. They've always been a team that's been able to score, but that said, they've been a little bit lambasted down low, and you've got a guy in Juan Sebastian Gorecito, who is a relatively good three-point shooter. He was over at Ball State and Portland to begin his career. He's been a career about 38.5% three-point shooter, a little bit of a one-trick pony guy that they're going to rely upon a little bit more for facilitation, and this is a backcourt that's in transition, but good news is you face off against an Idaho team that they just don't really generate turnovers. Outside the top 250 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis last season. Now, they bring back a lot of guys from last season. Isaiah Brickner, Colton Mitchell, Christian Gonzalez, and Gonzalez last season was one of your main scorers, putting in their 11.5 point shot, 35% from three-point range. Brickner didn't give you a lot of scoring, but still recall 2 years ago over at Marist, he did a nice job being one of the big guys with regards to that backcourt, and then Brody Woodbury gives you a lot of size coming in from Southeast Louisiana. Has always been a nice little post presence. Has always been like a 8 to 9 point per game guy, but he'll be able to provide you with about 5.5 rebounds per game. Not a ton of versatility, but a very good low post defender as well. I do think that is going to lead to things being a little bit more calm. You've got an Idaho team that traditionally is in the bottom half of all of college basketball in terms of total possessions per game. They just aren't very efficient on the defensive side of things last year, back outside the top 275 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and with Idaho not putting a lot of ball pressure on San Diego, I think that allows this new backcourt to be able to find their footing and get the job done. I did set San Diego as a 7.5 point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to take the Toreros, and I'm in on the total under, set my total 155.5. This is the last game on the normal Las Vegas betting board before we do the extra games. 7:35, 7:36. You've got Seattle playing against Eastern Washington. Eastern Washington, anywhere between a 6.5 to an 8.5 point underdog. So we are seeing a mix of numbers here, and your total is between 148.5 to a 149.5. I did set Seattle as a 9 point favorite, and I'm going to be willing to lay the number. Now, with Eastern Washington, your number 200 damn odds are much better than your number 1. They were able to hold in there against UCLA, losing that game by single digits, and then they gave Colorado a big scare a few nights ago. Now, I think that's just Colorado being a little bit of a joke of a program right now, but for Eastern Washington, yay verily to the fact that they've gone 2-1 against the spread to begin the season after they were 7-22 against the spread last season. And for Eastern Washington, under the Stan Monson style, I do think that they're going to be looking to bump up the tempo a little bit more, going against a Seattle team that they were outside the top 25 with regards to total possessions per game last season. Seattle, always a top 100 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, pretty good at being able to guard the perimeter, and I did think that Eastern Washington, who was well outside the top 300 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, they're going to be bleeding a few points. You had Seattle last year be outside the top 250 with regards to their three-point shooting percentage, but most of that was because John Chrysophilus, who 2 seasons ago, he was shooting 40% from 3. He was down to 28.5% last season. I think you're going to be somewhere between A and B with him. I think he gets back to like the mid-30s in terms of three-point shooting, but love the pickup of John Succhio. He was over at Gonzaga. A little bit of a project guy. They weren't able to find him a lot of of minutes over at Gonzaga, so now he comes over here at Seattle at 6'8". He's able to give you some nice versatility. He's been able to give you a few assists here in the early goings, and that helps out with Malik Harrington, who's a 4+ assists per game guy back, and Braden Maldonado last season was very solid for the Seattle team. He was a starter that threw in there a steal and a half, 9 points per contest, shot 39% from 3-point range, so I do think that there's a lot of upside with this Seattle backcourt. And then for this Eastern Washington team, having Andrew Cook back has been very nice for the squad, as he was averaging last year 15+ points per contest, and the addition of Isaiah Moses, who he was that number 2 guy that was really in the shadow of Barrington Hargress. He's always a guy that I've always liked. He was given the team double figures last year, few assists. That really elevates this team. And then you bring in Kyrie Huey, who last season was over at Miami, didn't see a lot of run 2 years ago over at Idaho State. He was giving you more like 6.5 rebounds per game. He's going to need to be that main guy down low, because you've got Emma Markwood back. He's a 6'9", little bit of a combo guy that's able to shoot 36.5% from 3, but not necessarily a guy that's going to be able to crash a glass. And I do think that with this Seattle team, they're going to be able to take a little bit more of the fight to this Eastern Washington bunch. And Eastern Washington, who's been experiencing a little bit of success, I think that they're going to take it on the chin a little bit against a Seattle team that I think that they do a nice job of being able to win from within, and I think they're much improved with their 3-point shooting. So made a total of 153. I like the over, and I'm willing to lay up to 8.5 here with Seattle. Now we get the extra games.
The normal betting board picks are complete, but there are some extra games today, so we go into the bonus.
306-567, 306-568 is Binghamton, and they're on the road against Georgetown. Georgetown open up a 23.5 point favorite. They're up to 25.5 point favorite. So on this game, it is 147.5. Did set my total 152.5. I'm going to be in on the over for Georgetown. This has been a team that's been a little bit more defense oriented ever since you saw Ed Cooley come on over, but I still think that this is going to be a bit more of a team that is going to be looking to run and shoot. You bring in KJ Lewis, a nice double figure scorer last season over at Arizona, and you bring back Malik Mack, who last season was a mid 33-point shooter, nice facilitator for this offense. So I do think that this is going to be a little bit more of an up-tempo team, and they are gambling on a few guys that just didn't pan out at their previous stop. Deshaun Harris-Smith, he was a former top 50 recruit that just was not able to find his footing over at Maryland. He was a big disappointment there. Vincent Iwuchukwu, not really his fault. He had that heart issue a few seasons ago, but he's a former top 50 recruit that at 7 feet tall. He's been able to show some promise thus far this season, but I did set my line more at a 22.5. I know that Binghamton has not necessarily had the world's greatest start to the season, but this is a Binghamton squad that I do think that having Jeremiah Quigley in the backcourt is going to be able to help them out quite a bit. 10.5 points per contest, was a nice double-figure scorer 2 seasons ago over at Iona. Demetrius Lilly is a big man down low that should be able to really help out this team. Last year at LaSalle, he was giving that team 7 rebounds per contest. He was over at Penn State to begin his career, really didn't find a lot of minutes there, but that said, I think that he's going to be a rock-solid big man for this team. It's a team that doesn't necessarily have a ton of depth, but Jackson Bengini, who was a nice go-to scorer over at Stonehill 2 seasons ago, where he was averaging about 11 points per contest, just has dealt with injuries throughout his career. He should be able to give this team a little bit of boost as well. And this is a Binghamton team that they really don't force the issue with regards to turnovers outside the top 300 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. And with Binghamton, I do think that they're going to be able to do just enough down low to be able to hold in there with Demetrius Lilly and company matching up with Vincent Iwuchukwu, and I do think that this is going to be a game that's going to be a little bit more up and down with a lot of clean possessions on both sides. So a circumstance where with Binghamton, I did set them as an underdog of 22.5 points. I'm going to be willing to take a shot here, and I do like the over. Set my total 152.5. 306-569, 306-570. Boston U plays host to Brown. What can Brown do for you? Well, if they lose this game by fewer than 4 points, they'll make you money. They're a 3.5 to a 4-point dog. The on this game is 133, and I'm going to be willing to lay with Boston U. I did set them as a 6.5 point favorite. Now, Boston U has been traditionally year in and year out a bottom 1 team in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but you've got a Brown team that's right now dealing with a lot of injury. We have not seen Landon Lewis on the floor for them this season. He was averaging last year 13.5 points, 6.5 rebounds per game, and then you have an additional guy that was averaging about 10.5 points per contest in Alexander Lesbert, who's currently out as well. So that means that Nefamra Dabu has been really the main guy for the team. He comes back after last year. He was a nice ancillary piece for them. He's been in the program at 6'8", and you saw his size, 6'10", Charlie O'Sullivan. He's a freshman that has stepped in, and he's been able to give you a little bit of help as well, but that's up for Dabu. I mean, him being the main guy after last year, he did give the team about 2 blocks per contest, but is primarily a defense-oriented guy. That's not necessarily where you want to be, and with Brown, we have noticed that the offense has very much struggled without these 2 guys, like the game that they played against Vermont went over, but that's a game that went to double overtime. That was under in regulation. You have 2 overtimes, and they should have probably won that game in overtime, but they gave up a layup with the clock running out in overtime to force double overtime, and then they scored a hearty 46 points against against Sena, night number 1 as well. You're just missing Keno Lilly for this team. And then for Boston U, you got Michael McNair. Last year, he gave that team about 12 points per contest, shot 40% from 3. He should be able to elevate this offense a little bit. You've got a lot of guards that have been just in the program a little bit in general, and down low, a guy Malcolm Chibaisi who's been around the block. He's been able to give the team a combined 17 rebounds in the first 2 games of the season. That's rock solid. We have yet to see Otto Landrum out there on the floor, a big man that's just always out with a little bit of injury, but Asmar Abdullah, who he was able to really uplift this team in the backcourt a season ago as a freshman, shot about 33% from 3, 7 points per contest as a bit of a 6th man. Returning him, I think, is very big for a Boston U team that they don't have a lot of free throw shooting. They've always been a bottom 50 team in terms of their free throw shooting percentage, but has been a team that year in and year out has been a top 20 team with regards to their defensive rebound percentage. I do not think that there's going to be any sort of second or third chance this year for Brown University dealing with all the injuries that they are. So I set my line at 6.5. I'm going to be willing to lay with Boston U and made my total 130.5. I had to shade down this total with just all the losses that Brown has right now. So in on the under, and I'm in on Boston U. 3-6-5-71, 3-6-5-72. Canisius is playing against the Mercyhurst, and Mercyhurst is a pick'em to a 1-point dog. Totals between 141 to a 143, and I did make Canisius a 3-point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to take a shot on them. For Mercyhurst, they're coming off of probably their best win in program history. They go on the road, they knock off Loyola Chicago last week. Yay, verily there. This for a team that actually lost quite a bit from a season ago, a team that really struggled making that transition from the D2 ranks to the D1 ranks, but still, you bring in a guy that is 6'8", that has a little bit of versatility. Mikolas Ivanauskas, who last season he was able to pop a few threes at 6'8". He gave the team about 4 rebounds per game. That helps, and he's like the only guy on the roster that's really able to give you a lot of rebounding, so that's a little bit of an issue. Very much an undersized team. Their main returner from a season ago, Bernie Blunt, to put it bluntly, he was able to give the team 12.5 point shot in the mid-30s from 3-point range last season, so a little bit of upside for him in the backcourt. And for Canisius, I do think that year number 2 for Jim Christian is going to be quite a bit better than it was in year number 1. Year number 1, the team won 3 games straight up, and they do have to replace a 20-point-per-game scorer from a season ago, so that never really helps, as they had Paul McMillan enter in the transfer portal, and he just decided to sit out this year due to personal issues. But I do think that they're going to be a little bit more balanced, even though they don't necessarily have that go-to scorer. Michael Everbrow, he over the last 2 seasons over at Sena and Central Arkansas has been about a 5-rebound-per-game guy. Khalil Singleton, he began his career over at Holy Cross, where he was able to do a solid job of being able to knock down threes, career 39% 3-point shooter. And Canisius was actually a top 75 team in terms of their 3-point shooting percentage. They just got absolutely plowed on the glass last season. That's why it's so big that they were able to bring in Wiles Wilmuth, who he over at Siena last year was not necessarily any sort of a scorer. He gave the team 3 points per contest, but threw in there a block and a half, 3.5 rebounds per game, and only about 16 minutes per contest. That's exactly what the team needed. And Brian Nadoja, he comes over from Central Michigan along with Seastone, where last season over at Central Michigan, 5.5 point per game score. Not a guy that's really going to light you up from 3, but this is a team that's much better down low. And for Canisius, they're looking to clean up a defense that was well outside the top 300 last year in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Mercyhurst was outside the top 300 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. I think that this is the sort of game that has a propensity to have some late game fouling, perhaps go to overtime. I did set a total here of a 145. Both of these teams were well outside the top 225 in terms of total possessions per game, but again, laid out how rough these defenses were, and I do think that you're going to be seeing a little bit more of that here, so I'm going to be in on the over end with Canisius, made them the 3-point favorite, so taking them on this rather pick 'em line. 3-6-5-73, 3-6-5-74. George Washington, our nation's first president, plays Socio-American. George Washington, an 18-point favorite total on this game. It is 154 to 154.5, and I did set this line at 22.5. I'm going to be willing to lay with our nation's first president. For American, they did get past Penn in their first game of the season against a D1 team, but for American, they do lose quite a bit from a season ago, losing Burke Rogers, who was a primary scorer from the team that made the NCAA tournament last season. That's a little bit rough. Now, you do have a few of the ancillary guys, like a Greg Jones last season was able to do a nice job giving the team darn near 10 points per contest at 6-6. He's able to give you a little bit of 3-point shooting. And Jeff Spruce, who missed a bit of time last season, he's always been a mid to high 30s 3-point shooter. He's been able to give the team quite a bit of production, about 8 to 9 points per contest over the last 2 seasons. But you're looking to Mr. Matt Mayock, who's saying 6'7", 6'8", to be able to provide some versatility. Has always been a solid 3-point shooter, and they need him to step up in sort of that Rogers role. And I just don't know if they're going to be able to match up with the fact that George Washington, it feels like they're Noah's Ark. They've got 2 of everything, as they return their main big man from last season, and Rafael Castro, who was able to supply about 8 to 9 rebounds per game. Now, we have yet to see Garrett Johnson on the floor. He was 2 seasons ago a nice double-figure scorer that at 6'6", 6'7", was able to give the team some boards, just do a little bit of this and that. We'll see if he returns returns after he had a major injury last season. And Trey Moss has been off the floor as well, but even with these guys out, you've got a guy in Trey Dinkins, who I really like what he's able to provide in the backcourt. Last season, he was able to do a nice job in terms of just being able to lead this offense, and you've also got Boo Boo Benjamin. He comes on over after he was over at Tarleton State. At Tarleton State, he was really good at being able to generate turnovers, and Dinkins, when he was over at Duquesne last season, about 3 assists per contest, 13 points per game, so he's got familiarity with the Atlantic 10, and he was shooting about 38% from three-point. Gene Amarujian, who was a nice go-to scorer over at Iona, along with Hofstra last few seasons, says they have to give you too much, but Luke Hunger has been able to step up. He's a 6'10" big man that's able to give you a little bit down low. You've got a guy in Trey Autry who's with the system last season. Like, this team has a good mix of guys that have been within the program for quite a while, and bring in some very, very good transfers to boot with it. And additionally, when it comes to this Chris Caputo style as well, 2 years ago, they were just not good on defense. They took some massive strides forward last year, and I do think that they're going to be even better this year. They go up against an American team that they were in the bottom 10 last season in terms of total possessions per game and have been 310th or worse in terms of total possessions per game each of the last 3 years. Recognize that Penn game got out of sorts. I think that this is going to be a little bit more of a lower scoring slog, and I think that George Washington just takes it to them. So I did set my total 146.5. I like the under, and with George Washington, willing to lay up to 22 with them. 306-575, 306-576. South Kakalaki, South Carolina is going to be playing us. The Presbyterian Blue Hose are an underdog of 15 to 16.5 points. 137 is the total. I did set my total here out of 144.5. I do like the over. Presbyterian looking to play a little bit more lower tempo. Last year they were outside the top 275 in terms of total possessions per game, but they're coming off of a nice win against Georgia State, and it looks like the defense has improved after last year. Presbyterian was outside the top 185 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They were a little bit rough with regards to their three-point shooting defense, but having back a man that was banged up last season in Jonah Pierce, he in like 8 games was giving you 7 rebounds per game. Jalen Peterson, great name. He stepped up down low. Having these two guys in tandem is big. Both of these guys are actually averaging 10 plus rebounds per game to begin the season. Recognize that it's a little bit of a small sample size, but I mean, that's big because you do have to replace a lot of the backcourt from a season ago. Losing someone like Corey Mincy was a little bit rough on them, but now you've got in there Carl Parrish in a little bit of a bigger role. Last season he was a guy that came off the bench, was able to give you some nice scoring, but that said, now in a little bit more of a primary role, he's going to need to step up with Tristan Wilson, Iverson King, a pair of guys that stand 6'6" that are able to give you a little bit of outside shooting, be able to elevate as well. Presbyterian was a top 80 team with regards to their three-point shooting 8 seasons ago, and for South Carolina, this squad, if they weren't in the SEC, they'd be looked at much, much differently because you do bring back Michi Johnson, who he began his career over at Iowa State. He went to South Carolina, went back to Iowa State. Now he's back at South Carolina. Last we saw him 2 years ago over at South Carolina, was giving that team 13 points per contest, and even when he was out there on the floor last season over at Iowa State, was able to do a pretty rock solid job for them. Unfortunately, he just got injured very early on during the season, so that limited his just overall output, but that said, he should be able to elevate this offense. Additionally, you've got a guy in Miles Tute who's been within the program the last few seasons, a holdover from that NCAA tournament team at 6'7", always a mid-30s three-point shooter, and I like the versatility of Mongolian Mike, who last season he was over at Utah, giving you a few assists, so throw in there like 5 rebounds at 6'8", not necessarily like a dominant scorer, but he just does a little bit of everything for this team. And then Kobe Knox, a guy that's been around the block, they get him in after he over at South Florida last year was a nice double-figure scorer, was able to shoot in the mid-30s from three-point range. I do think that South Carolina a little bit more advanced with regards to their offense. I do think that bringing back Michi Johnson is going to be able to elevate them with that regard as well, and might not be as good on the interior with the loss of Colin Murray-Boyle, so this is a circumstance where I did lay it with South Carolina, set them as a 20.5 point favorite, and made my total 144.5. I do like the over. 306-577, 306-578. Tennessee plays us in North Florida. North Florida is an underdog of 40.5 points, so it's game between 153.5 to a 154.5, and I set my line at 33.5. I'm going to be willing to take the points here with the mighty Osprey. Now, for Matthew Driscoll, his system has always been a lot of just bombing it from three-point range in general. We saw a little bit of changing of the guard in the offseason, but I mean, they're sticking with a system of just having a lot of guys that like to shoot it from three-point range. Typically, this is a team that takes more than 50% of their shots from three. Tennessee, as we know, year in and year out, they're a top 25 team in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They seem to be a little bit better with regards to their interior defense rather than their backcourt defense, as they do lose to Kai Ziegler from a season ago. I still think that they're going to be rock solid. Jacoby Gillespie coming in, he was averaging 14 points per contest, but and you're looking to someone like a Felix Apara, who's able to give you a block and a half per contest. And I still do think that this North Florida team is going to be okay with regards to their three-point shooting, enough to be able to cover this number. You got Devin Irons, who comes in from Lafayette, where he was a 9-point-per-game scorer last 2 seasons, just got banged up last season, has never been like a guy that completely explodes from three-point range, but he should be able to help flow some good, clean offense. They're looking to Cameron Oriole, who was one of the main returners from a season ago last year, 7 points per contest, shot in the mid-30s from three-point range. North Florida lost really 5 other top 6 scorers from the season ago, so having him back, that is very critical for this team, as they're also going to be looking to a little bit of Mason Lee, who he was unable to get out there on the floor too much, but at 6'7", he's a guy that's able to light you up from three-point range. That's pretty much what this North Florida team is based all around, and for North Florida, we did see them in their first game just get completely pounded by Florida by kind of 64-104, but hey, if they lose that game by 40, they actually cover this number, so I mean, that's actually a little bit of upside there. In Tennessee, they're always a team that is a relatively low-tempo team outside the top 240 in terms of total possessions per game, and Nate Ament might change that a little bit. He has put in their 41 points in the first 2 games of the season at 6'10". He's able to do a little bit of everything, but they are breaking in a little bit of a new backcourt along Gillespie. You're probably going to be looking to Bishop Boswell, who didn't see a lot of playing time last season. They're going to need him to be able to step up. I like the fact that they bring in Jalen Carey, who was rock solid over at Vanderbilt, but again, this is a team that's very strong down low, but now they're facing off against a North Florida team that's really going to be looking to take a lot of threes in this game, and I do think that that does enough for North Florida to be able to hold in this game. So it is a circumstance where I set my line at a 33.5. I'm going to be willing to take those points, and with regards to this total, I did set mine at a 153.5, so I had a 154 plus. I'm also going to be in on the under 306.579, 306.580. Coppin State, they are on the road against South Florida, and South Florida finds themselves as very sizable favorites here of 30.5 points. 172.5 is the total. I just flat out don't think the Coppin State does their part with this total. I set mine at a 149.5. I'm in on the under. Coppin State last year was in the bottom 3 in all of college basketball in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and I recognize that South Florida is going to be looking to run, as Brian Hodgson, his team was at Arkansas State a top 75 team in terms of total possessions per game year 1, more around about 100th in year 2, but for Coppin State, right now they're averaging 63 points per contest. Like, even if South Florida scores 105 points, if they stay true to that 63 points, that's an under. Like, that's the way that I'm looking at this right now. You've got Khalil Horton, who's right now leading the way with 9 points per contest. He's one of the few guys that return for this team, but man, for Coppin State, this is rough. That's why I set my line at 31.5 for South Florida, even though I do think that this Coppin State team is going to just get lambasted. So I'm going to be willing to lay it here with South Florida. Like, I just don't know where you get the low post presence from. Like, you've got Tyler Koenig, who's 6'9" for this Coppin State team. Like, this is just not a Division I roster. I recognize that night number 1 against Maryland, they didn't get completely pounded. They lost that game by 22 points, and it was a little bit of a triumphant effort against James Madison, but for South Florida, they should be able to really take the fight to Coppin State. I like the fact that you bring in Josh Omajafu, who is very rock solid over at Robert Morris, a high 33-point shooter that just does a little bit of everything, but Isaiah Nelson should be able to completely dominate down low for South Florida. He comes out over with Hodgson from Arkansas State. He's been able to give the team 8+ rebounds per game thus far this season. Was doing the same over at Arkansas State last year. Joseph Pignon, nice double-figure score over at Arkansas State last season, nearly a 40% three-point shooter. He's in the fold as well, and Damian Collins has yet to really be unleashed. He's a former top 25 recruit that saw solid minutes over at LSU. Like, this is an embarrassment of riches for this South Florida team. I think that they're going to be doing a lot of mixing and matching in this game as well, because you do have a lot of transfers that come in, so I do think that there's going to be a lot of, shall we say, unique sort of combos, and I do think that Brian Hodgson is going to be utilizing this game to just know what he's got in terms of his rotations, and I think even with that, they're just going to be able to embarrass this Coppin State team. I did set my line here at a 31.5. I'm willing to lay up to 31 South Florida, and on the under semi total 149, 36.581, 36.582. Longwood plays host to James Madison, and the Dukes of James Madison are a 1-point favorite to a 1-point underdog, depending upon where you look. Some books have Longwood as a favorite, some James Madison. Total is 152.5, and I did set James Madison as a 2-point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to take them, laying the 1/ as a money line underdog with Longwood. It's been a little bit of an up and down road for them under Ronnie Thomas. I think that this is going to be a team that's going to be pretty rock solid on the defensive side of things, and I think that they've got a nice feature guy in Jacoy Hutchinson. He was over at George Washington last season, a nice ancillary guy. He's been a part-time starter the last 2 seasons, career about 33% three-point shooter. He's able to give you 7 points, a steal per contest, just a nice guard in the backcourt, and that helps out a Longwood team that that they really struggled with their three-point shot to begin the season last year. They picked up steam as the season went along, as KJ McClurg had a little bit of a tough time making the leap from the non-Division I ranks. He was a very good Division II player to the D1 ranks, and last year he was only able to put in there 7 points per contest, shot 31% from three. I think he's going to be a little bit better this season, but for Longwood, over the last few seasons, they've been pretty rock solid on glass, and now they really don't have anyone outside of Jalen Payne, who doesn't see a lot of minutes, above 6'7", that's going to be seeing meaningful minutes, and I think that's where James Madison takes hold. I know that for James Madison, first few games have not been necessarily great. Even their 91 game against Washington and Lee, it was a little bit less than savory, but you return Eddie Ricks, who he was actually coming over from Wright St with Preston Spradlin. Last year, he gave the team 5+ rebounds per game. I think part of the struggle has been just breaking in a new backcourt. Cliff Davis was a nice double-figure scorer over at Northwestern State, and I believe Prairie View as well. He needs to be able to find his footing in this offense. And then you've got Bradley Douglas, who last year was over at Georgia Southern, and he was rock solid, 12.5 points per contest. Not a great three-point shooter, but he's able to give you 2.5 assists, steal 1.5 per contest. I think that he's a good fit with the system, but I think that he's having a little bit of a tough time getting down the system in general as well. But you've had Gabe Newhoff, who has come on over from the non-D1 ranks. He's actually been the top scorer for James Madison at 6'9". He does a nice job of being able to clog things up down low. I do think that James Madison good to be able to get back to their roots. You bring in a guy like Eli Wilborn as well, who's solid over at St. Francis of Pennsylvania, and I do think that they make this a little bit of a sloppier game. I think that James Madison wins this with their big man. I did set my total as a result at a 148. I like the under, and with James Madison taking them as a 1-point favorite / on the money line as an underdog. 306-583, 306-584. Vanderbilt plays us at Eastern Kentucky. Eastern Kentucky underdogs of 20.5 points. Total on this game, it is 170, and I made my total 170.5. So 170 or less is my buy point on the over for Eastern Kentucky. This is always a team that loves to run under A.W. Hamilton. This is a team that's going to very much gamble for turnovers, as last season they were a top 50 team in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. That as a result means that they're going to give up a lot of looks from three-point range, and for Eastern Kentucky over the last few seasons, they've been able to do a really good job with their post presence. 2 seasons ago, you had Isaiah Kosar be one of the best shot blockers in all of college basketball. Last year, you had Mayor Wool do a pretty solid job down low, along with Montavious Merrick as well. Merrick was giving that team right around about 8 or so rebounds per game, and this season you got Myrick back in the fold, but that said, you got a whole bunch of new guys in the backcourt. Now you're looking at Turner Buttrey, who's been with the program for quite a while, to be able to give you a little bit more scoring. Juan Cranford, who was over at St. Francis of Pennsylvania last year, averaging about 10.5 points per contest, relatively solid three-point shooter. They're going to need him to be a big part of the offense, and Jackson Holt is one of your main holdovers from a season ago. 7 points per contest, shot in that neighborhood about 39% from three-point range last season. You've got the good versatility there, and I think it's going to be just enough to be able to hold in there against Vanderbilt. As a result, I set my line at 26.5, but Vanderbilt should be able to really run things down low. I like the fact that Vanderbilt brought back their top rebounder from a season ago, Devin McLaughlin. He's going to pair up very well with Jalen Washington, 6'10" big man that comes in from North Carolina. You just have an embarrassment of riches in the backcourt. You got Tyler Nickelback, who is a nice 6'7", do-it-all sort of Swiss Army knife guy for the team, Ike Okereke. He comes over from Cornell, one of the most up-tempo styles in all of college basketball. He's able to dish. He's able to give you some three-point shooting, just does a bit of everything. And then Duke Miles, who has been all around the block, and I think they committed to 15 schools in the offseason. He comes on over after a nice rock-solid season over at Oklahoma that saw him shoot 43% from three-point range. This is a system that in Vanderbilt is going to be looking to generate a lot of turnovers. They're going to be looking to play fast under Mark Byington. We all remember what he did over at James Madison. Did a very solid job in year number 1. I think he expands upon that in season number 2 here at Vanderbilt, but Eastern Kentucky, they're a little bit of a mid-major clone of that, and I think that does just enough to keep them in there. 170 or less and on the over, and one takes 27 plus here with Eastern Kentucky. 306-585, 306-586. Dartmouth is on the road against Bryant. Bryant finds themselves as a favorite here of 1 point. Totals between 149 and 150, and semi-total 155.5. I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the over. Dartmouth has always traditionally been a pretty slow and controlled team, but we saw Dartmouth last season actually really crank up the tempo. As a matter of fact, for Dartmouth, in terms of total possessions per game last year, they were 34th in all of college basketball. Meanwhile, you've got a Bryant team that they are not going to be quite what they were a season ago, where last year they were a top 10 team in terms of total possessions per game, as now you've got Jamion Christian, who was the former coach over at George Washington, spent a little bit of time over at Mount St. Mary's as well, taking hold of the program, and we did see Bryant get completely lambasted a few nights ago against Georgia Tech. That was not tremendous, losing that game 74-45, but I do think that things are going to be cranked up tempo a little bit more here. I am in on the over. Now, Bryant is featuring a lot of size. Pretty much out of your top 5 scorers, all of them are 6'5" or taller right now, so they are going to be looking a little bit there. Ty Tabalis, he's their main facilitator right now. He's a true freshman, so you've got a little bit of a young backcourt, but you do have a guy in Quincy Allen who's a former top 175 recruit, began his career at Colorado. It's just dealt with a lot of injuries, but had a nice second half of the season. Last year over at Chicago State, they're going to be relying upon Khalil Williams, a guy that comes on up from the non-D1 ranks to be able to give you some versatility at 6'5", and I do think that it's going to work against a Dartmouth team that they do return Brandon Mitchell-Day from a season ago. He was their top rebounder, giving them about 7 to 8 rebounds per game at 6'8". He's able to pop it relatively well from three-point range, but you do lose that top scorer in Ryan Cornish, and he was at his stake for the team. Now, Kareem Thomas has been able to give the team 40 points in the first 2 games of the season after he just could not get out there on the floor last season, dealt with a little bit of injury, but you're also dealing with a few guys being in and out of the fold. Carter Edmondson, who is one of the top returning scorers, he has yet to hit the floor for this team, and that's a little bit of an issue, and if he were out there, I probably would set Dartmouth as a very slight favorite, but I have some question marks there. Jaden Williams has been with the program for quite a while, and last season's about an 8-point per game scorer, career 38% three-point shooter. He does a nice job there. I think the Bryant might have a little bit of tough time guarding the arc with all their clunky size, but I do think that with this Bryant team, with all the size that they do have, that allows them to be able to match up relatively well with Mitchell Day. Williams is a 6'6", little bit of a combo player as well. And I do think that a Dartmouth team that they really prided themselves on defensive rebounding last year, top 10 team in terms of not allowing opponents to be able to grab their missed shots as an offensive rebound. They're going to have a little bit of a tough time here with this Bryant squad, and it's a Dartmouth team that really didn't generate a lot of turnovers last season either, and Dartmouth, they themselves, 20 turnovers in that first game of the season against Marist, so they're clearly looking a little bit sloppy there, but I do think that you get tempo in this game. I like the over, and with Bryant, I'm going to be willing to lay up to 3 with them. 3-6-5-87, 3-6-5-88. Texas Southern plays us to Samford. Sam Amford finds themselves as a 5.5 to a 6-point favorite. Total on this game, it is 151, and with Samford, I did set them as a favorite of 6.5 points, so I'm going to be willing to take a shot here on them. With Samford, I do think that they're going to be looking to run once again. I don't think that's going to be quite the Bucky McMillan system, but they bring in Lenny Acuff, who is a very rock-solid coach over at Lipscomb. His Lipscomb team last year was a little bit more slow than it had been in past years, but still, his teams always like to be able to shoot it from three-point range. He brought with him Dylan Faulkner, a 6'9" guy that I think is going to be a big part of this team. As a matter of fact, we've already seen that with him scoring 35 points in the first 2 games of the season. Never has been a guy that's been able to pop it from 3, but career field goal shooting percentage right around about 60%, so nice efficiency there. You've got Norris squared with Keaton Norris and Cade Norris. Your main guy that you look at is Keaton Norris, who last year over at Wright St, he was shooting 45% from three-point range, 7.5 points, 4.5 assists per game. He figures to be a nice facilitator. Going against a Texas Southern team that their offense has been rough to begin the season. They were unable to get past the 60-point plateau against Gonzaga, and then against Texas A&M, they gave up a 100 spot. And this is a Texas Southern team that typically they've been a nice team on the glass. They just have lost their identity under Johnny Jones over the last 2 years. I'm not sure what has necessarily happened. Now, they're trying to restore that with Troy Hupstead coming in after he had Maryland Eastern short 2 seasons ago, was a 6+ rebound per game guy. Last season, he just had a little bit of a tough time getting out there for UT Arlington, but missed the first game of the season in that game against the Texas A&M Aggies. He was able to throw in their 9 rebounds, so he should be able to help out a little bit with that regard. And Texas Southern was a little bit better with their 3-point shooting a season ago. They need Zatarius Mortree, who has been with the program for a long time, to be able to step it up. As a matter of fact, his best year was as a freshman when he gave the team 8 points per contest. He has actually seen his points per game average go down with every progressive year, so that's not necessarily a great sign for him. You've got Alex Anderson back in the fold after he began his career over at Incarnate Word, and last season in the small sample size he had at Texas Southern was struggling a little bit, but I mean, he was limited to 10 games. He was on the floor and off the floor due to injury. When we last saw him over at Incarnate Word in Alabama State, he was able to give the team 3 assists per contest, so that should be able to help out the good, clean offense. And for Texas Southern, this has always been a team that's never really been afraid to run. You take a look at Texas Southern last year, and they were one of the most up-tempo teams in all of college basketball, top 50 team in terms of total possessions per game, a team that really gave it up defensively as well, both from the interior and beyond the arc. You've got Kobe Granger back, who's able to give you a little bit of size, but he has not really been able to give you a lot of rebounding as well. And I do think that with Samford, with having Faulkner down low, they win from within, and I do think that Samford going to get plenty of open looks from 3-point range. So my total 160.5. Like the over-end with Samford, I'm going to be willing to lay up to 6 with them. 3-6-5-89, 3-6-5-90. Oklahoma State plays us a Prairie View. Prairie View, a big underdog here of 32 points. So on this game, it is 170. This opened up at a 164. I set my total 168.5, so I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the under, but I did set Prairie View as a 24.5 point underdog. Prairie View, year in and year out, they do a great job in terms of generating turnovers. The last 10 years, they've been in the top 45 in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis in 9 of them, and they face off against an Oklahoma State team that thus far they've had 24 turnovers in their first 2 games of the season. Was actually very impressed by the way that they looked against Texas A&M. I thought that Texas A&M style might prevent a little bit of just offense from being generated, but they did a nice job still scoring over 85 points in that game, as it's really Coleman squared getting it started for the team. Isaiah Coleman was a nice double-figure scorer over at Seton Hall last season. Christian Coleman, he was solid over at UAB with 11.5 points. Not a guy that really pops in from 3, but is able to give you about 7 or so rebounds per game. And then Victorious Miller, who was a nice sort of ancillary scorer over at LSU in a main role this season, 36 points in the first 2 games of the season. And they've had Jalen Curry do a nice job of being able to be a main facilitator for this team. Jalen Curry, who was over at UMass last season, he was giving that team right around about 4 assists, 13.5 points per contest, just was surrounded with no guards that could knock down shots whatsoever. And you do have to have a little bit of concern with Oklahoma State not necessarily being an amazing 3-point shooting team. Now for Prairie View, they always get plowed on the glass, this team year in and year out. They're outside the top 340 with regards to rebound percentage, but they might be a little bit better this year with Marcel Bryant in year number 2 of the system. He began his career over at Omaha last season, gave the team 5 boards, 7 points per contest, so you should be able to help out a little bit with that regard. And I do think that Tayron Joseph coming over is very big. If you recall what he did 2 seasons ago over at Southern, he was averaging 20.5 points per contest for that squad. Not a great 3-point shooter. He only shoots about 30.5% from 3 in Prairie View. Despite the fact that they're a team that they very much rely upon their backcourt and generating turnovers, traditionally not a great 3-point shooting team, but that said, you bring in a guy like a Corey Wells, who I think that he's going to play very well for this team after he was a guy that was a 6'7", little bit of a gadget guy over at Utah Valley last season. And then teach me how to Dougie Williams. He was over at Quinnipiac the last few seasons, was always a primary reserve for them. Not an amazing 3-point shooter, but again, a guy that does a nice job in terms of his on-ball defense, can generate a steal or 2 for you. I think that he's going to be a really good fit for a Prairie View team that I think, once again, they're going to be able to get this generated. I think that they're going to do a nice job being able to get some turnovers in what I think is going to be an up and down frenetic game. Set my line at 24.5. Will take those points for Prairie View, and I'm in on the under of 170. Set my total 168.5. 36.591, 36.592. Fairleigh Dickinson is on the road against Texas. Texas is back to being a very big-time favorite here of 30 to 31.5 points. So on this game between 157 to a 158, and set my line at 31.5. So 31 or less, I'm going to be willing to lay with Texas. And for Fairleigh Dickinson, it does feel like they're trying to play a little bit of a different brand of basketball. You recall when they had their NCAA tournament win over Purdue, they were famously one of the smallest teams in all of college basketball last season. Now they've added a little bit more size. You bring in someone like a David Javitich, hopefully I said that correct, an international man of mystery that comes in as a freshman, and he's been able to supply the team with 28 points in the first 2 games of the season. You bring in a true 7-footer in Cyril Martinoff, who he began his career over at Georgia Tech, has just bounced around to like Eastern Kentucky, Eastern Michigan, has never really been able to find his footing, but now in this system, it feels like they're going to be featuring him a little bit more. And then Noah Melson. Melson, he's a guy that was over at Chattanooga a few seasons ago that was giving you 4 points per contest, has always been a mid-30s 3-point shooter at 6'6". He should be able to give this team a little bit of versatility. And then Deshaun Jackson, he was over at VMI to begin his career, and in his last year at VMI before just really not being able to get out there for Northern Colorado last year, 10.5 points, 10.5 rebounds, a little bit over a steal per contest. So a Fairleigh Dickinson team that's always been rough with regards to rebounding and has not played a lot of defense. Looks like they're going to be playing a little bit more of that, but that's also at the expense of their backcourt. And for Texas, guess what they bring back? Some really good backcourt pieces. Jordan Pope and Tremont Mark last season were both able to give the team double figures. Pope, a high 30s 3-point shooter, and Mark, he's a guy that he plays a little bit more off the ball at 6'5". He just does a little bit of everything. He'll pull in there some boards. And for this Texas team, they're really looking a lot more to Mateus Vokatesis, hopefully I said that correct, a man that comes in from Florida Atlantic, where last season, 10 points per contest, 4.5 boards, not a guy that's really going to be able to give you a lot of 3-point shooting, but 29 points here in the first 2 games of the season. John Weaver last year was a 38% three-point shooter, and Simeon Wilcher, he just didn't really find a lot of success over at St. John's, but he was able to see quite a few minutes for them. I think that he's going to be able to do a nice job in terms of being able to fit this system as well. Just lots of great guard play, and then you've got Lacina Traore, who he was with Sean Miller over at Xavier last year, but never got out there on the floor because he was dealing with injury. You go back to what he did 2 seasons ago over at Long Beach State. He actually had 2 seasons at Long Beach State where he averaged a double-double. He should be able to do a nice job in terms of giving this team something down low. So Texas, they're going to be able to dominate with regards to that backcourt play, and then in terms of frontcourt play, they should be able to really own that as well. So I did set my line at a 161.5. I do think that Sean Miller is going to be looking to have this Texas team playing quite up tempo, much like he had his Xavier team playing. So like the over, and I'm willing to lay up to 31 here with Texas. 306.593, 306.594. Valparaiso plays us at Nichols. Nichols is an underdog of a point, totals between 144 to 146.5, and I made my total a 146.5. So at a 146 or less, I'm going to be willing to take a shot on the over. You've got a Valparaiso unit that has been just dealing with a lot of their top players leaving via the transfer portal. That's been a little bit rough for them, but I do think that they are finding a little bit of something in terms of their low post play, and that's a big reason why I'm going to be willing to take a shot on them, as you've got a guy in Carter Hapoi, hopefully I said that correct. He comes over from the country of New Zealand, and he's a guy that should be able to give this team a little bit more down low. And then Sean Tapula, he's another guy that he should be able to give you some nice size at 6'10". That's actually not an international player. He's actually from the state of Indiana. So in case you were wondering, they're not going completely with the international men of mystery, but we got a 6'8" freshman in JT Pettigrew who's been able to give them a nice little bit of a burst. And it appears as though the main guy that's going to be playing off the ball is Isaiah Barnes, who was a former top 100 recruit of Michigan. Last year over at Tulsa, played some solid minutes, 9.5 points, was a starter, shot in the mid-30s from 3-point range, and I think that he's going to be able to help out a Valparaiso team that just has not been efficient with regards to their offense in general. Probably not going to be once again this year. They're looking to Justice McNair to be able to take some strides forward in the backcourt after he averaged about 4.5 points per contest in a reserve role for the team, but we also have on the flip side a Nichols team that it just appears as though they don't have much of an identity on offense. They're a nice 20-win team last season, but they lose pretty much 4 of their top 5 scores, and they do bring back a little bit of a facilitator in Trey English, who was able to give them 3 assists per game, but has never been too much of a scorer. Now they're going to be looking to Jalen Cerealis, who began his career over at Utah Tech, to really be able to elevate off the 6.5 points per contest they had in season number 1 in this system. Did shoot about 35.5% from 3, and gave the team 4.5 boards, a steal per game, so quite a bit of versatility there, but you do lose someone like Jamal West, who was able to do a nice job in terms of being able to mask whatever stink this team had, and then Sincere Malone. He's had a little bit of a tough time going from Eastern Illinois on over to Nichols, as when he was over at Eastern Illinois, he was generating about 2 steals per game as a true freshman. He just hasn't been able to give you that sort of level of defense for Nichols, and Nichols, we saw them night number 1 against Kentucky, a Kentucky team that loves to play up-tempo, get held to 51 points in that game. Now, to their credit, the defense was actually pretty rock solid in that game, and you do have a guy in Z Hamada who's been around the block. He was over at Utah State and Sacramento State, and has always been a relatively good contributor last year at Sacramento State, about 12 points, 4 boards, shot in the mid-30s from 3-point range. That said, I do think that Valparaiso finds a way to be able to get it done here. I think that Nichols is going to be playing at a little bit more of an up-tempo pace, and for Valparaiso, I do think that they're going to be prioritizing looking to get the ball in the interior against a Nichols team that doesn't have a lot of size this season. So I did set my line at 2.5. I'm going to be willing to lay the one with Valparaiso, and at a 146 or less, I'm going to be in on the over, and we're at things up with 306.595, 306.596. Random college basketball game in Hawaii between the Rainbow Warriors and Mississippi Valley State. And Mississippi Valley State is a 41.5 point underdog. Total on this game is 146.5, and I mean, I am just a schmuck for pain here, but I'm taking the points with Mississippi Valley State. I set them as a 36-point dog. Now, with Mississippi Valley State, they lost their games against Division I teams by 40-plus points, and all of them. Now, they got a nice win over the non-Division I Mississippi University for women. Congratulations on being able to take them down, but that said, I actually like what I'm seeing out of Michael James. Michael James looks like a legitimate college basketball player. He has put in there for the team 74 points in the first 3 games of the season. Now, part of that was against the University of Women, but in the 2 games against the D1 teams as well, he's actually looked competent. So that's a good thing for this team. You've got a little bit more size with Sam Murray along with Lamont Sams being right around about 6'8", 6'9", and Patrick Punch is a guy that comes in from the non-Division I ranks. He's been able to give this team a little bit of punch himself. You lose pretty much everything else from a season ago, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because last year they were dead last in the country in terms of both points scored and points allowed on a per possession basis. They're still in the bottom 10 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, more around 330th in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, which, as sad as it sounds, it's actually a marked improvement from where they have been in past years. And they go up against the Rainbow Warriors, seeing that they always have a little bit more of a defensive identity. Last year, Hawaii outside the top 240 in terms of total possessions per game, but a top 20 rebound rate team, a team that's always going to be able to lock you down with that regard. They're not going to try to just completely run you out of the gym or anything like that. Now, you take a look at that last game against East Texas A&M. They scored 100 points, but that was because they might have had the most rogue reffing crew I've ever seen. Like, I was actually watching that game. You had Hawaii shoot 54 free throws. I think East Texas A&M was called for like 18 fouls in the first half. Like, that's just not going to happen in this game. I think that there's going to be a little bit more mercy shown on the fouling front. And you've got Yetis Namishka, the top scorer back from season ago, is able to give you double figures, began his career at Xavier, 6'7" combo player that's able to pop it from 3 and Quandary Bullock should be able to elevate this backcourt as well. Last year over at South Dakota as a part-time starter, 12 points, threw in there a steal and per contest. Not an amazing three-point shooter there, but for his career, as well, he's been about a 36-37% three-point shooter. And Harry Ruliadev, he's a guy that returns from a season ago. It looks like he's going to be able to take some nice strides forward. This is going to be a Mississippi Valley State team that's going to get bludgeoned down low. 7-footer Isaac Johnson, who was a starter over at Utah Valley, has looked very good. 19 rebounds in the first 2 games of the season. And I am for Mississippi Valley State. Are they going to be very competitive in this game? No, but the number of 40.5 has just gone a little bit too ridiculous in what I think is going to be a bit of a slog of a game. Semi-total 136.5. I like the under and the points here with Mississippi Valley State. Set them as a 36.5 point dog, and that wraps things up for the Wednesday edition of Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the Beast and Family Podcast. A big thanks to our good friend Ryan McIntyre of the Sports Gambling Podcast Network for joining me in the last segment. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of 2 ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letter CM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, giving you picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. So I will be back with you guys once again tomorrow. Thank you so much.